Chapter 1677. Fighting Ding Xiaochen. That was a woman that was completely enshrouded in a black long dress, her features old-fashioned. Though she looked to only be in her 20s, she was serious in speech and manner, as if someone owed her a large sum of money, and disliked anyone she cast her eye on. She was ruthless in her moves, controlling the rarely seen regulations of darkness. As darkness swept past, everything would be corroded, which was incredibly frightening. Ling Han had also cultivated regulations of darkness, and that was the darkness of the paramount night, but it was more inclined towards a supplementary skill, completely different from her corrosive power that was filled with destruction. And there is that youth too. Ling Han signaled. The youth he was speaking of looked to be only in his mid-teens, still bearing a childish look on his face. Occasionally, he would show a sheepish grin, but if anyone were to think that he was harmless because of that, he would be out of luck. The youth wielded a sword, which was incredibly fast and extraordinarily sharp. Previously, he had delivered a series of consecutive sword strikes and severed his opponent's weapon. The final strike had pierced the chest of his opponent, and if it were not for a light hum from Ding Hu that sent him backwards, his opponent would probably have become a dead corpse by now. Crafty, vicious, and merciless. These were the traits that Ling Han had labeled this youth with. He should have gone to be an assassin. Being a soldier was really too stifling for his talent. As expected, this youth had even drawn Ding Hu's attention. Though he had humphed, expressing his displeasure over how the youth had delivered a fatal strike to his companion, he could not help but cast a few more looks at this youth. This kind of talent was worthy of bringing into the Ding clan. If he was well nurtured, he would become a severing mundane tier assassin. Though battle prowess was an important criterion for judging elites, the world did not have the rule that elites would not die in the hands of someone weaker. Of course, it was an absolutely impossible feat for a Genesis tier to kill a severing mundane tier, but for a first severance to kill a second severance, or even a third severance, was not just a fantasy story, and this usually happened with assassins. No one would continuously maintain his prime battle condition at all times. There would eventually come a time of carelessness, and an excellent assassin would be able to grasp this fleeting instant and move to kill him. In Ding Hu's eyes, this youth was a treasure. Unfortunately, though he had the intention, he did not dare directly bring this youth back to the Ding clan. The three clans had a rule that such talents required a fair competition among the three of them. However, since it was he who had first discovered him, he could later have the clan move to investigate the weaknesses and habits of this youth so that they could take appropriate steps. 90 years later, those that had not yet been eliminated would officially join the Dark Moon Army, and these 90 years would be the time for the three great clans to use their various methods. Some would promise great profits. Some would simply take him into the clan as a son-in-law and begin a competition among themselves for important talents. Of course, there was no single person that could simultaneously gain the interest of all three clans most of the time. There were really too few prodigies. Mao Dai, for example, had gained the admiration of who knew how many prized daughters of the three clans, yet surprisingly did not choose any one of them. However, he was also out of the control of the three great clans because of this, and maintained an absolutely independent stand. Now, he was also above worldly matters, and the three great clans were all competing to attract his interest. The tournament battles continued. The Empress expressed that she would not compete for the position of captain. She was going to stay with Ling Han. One of the two of them definitely had to be a soldier. Otherwise, if they were in different teams, they would be in a competitive relationship. Elites moved respectively. Only the strong would be respected in the army. If you had defeated your opponent when he was completely exhausted, then even if you became a captain, who among your subordinates would truly respect you? Mao Shuyu had also joined the battle. She was at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, and also had 3 stars aptitude, so her battle prowess was extremely strong. She easily obtained the position of defending champion. "I'll go then." Ling Han released the Empress's hand reluctantly. The Empress nodded gently, her eyes enchanting. Ling Han leaped and arrived in front of a person. It was Ding Xiaochen. Ha! Ah! Seeing that Ling Han had actually gone to challenge Ding Xiaochen, a considerable number of people exclaimed in shock. Previously, those who had challenged Ding Xiaochen had all been defeated terribly, and now it was almost an hour's time since the last person had challenged him. It looked like he was just about to become the first person that would not need 3 days' time to become captain, yet Ling Han had thrown a wrench into his plans. This time, Ding Xiaochen would at least have to wait for another hour. Why had he challenged Ding Xiaochen? Was he trying to make things difficult for him? Ding Xiaochen was also slightly surprised, but then he showed a menacing expression. Previously, he had not managed to get a chance. He had not thought that Ling Han would actually deliver himself right into his hands. He really was courting death. If it had been the other vice commanders from the other clans, Ding Xiaochen would be stopped even if he wanted to deliver a fatal strike, but would Ding Hu stop him? "You're dead." Ding Xiaochen smirked coldly. "I have to say, you are incomparably stupid. Your mouth stinks. Have you forgotten to rinse your mouth when you woke up?" Ling Han said slowly. If it was a verbal battle, he really feared no one. The more stubborn your mouth is now, the worse your suffering will be later. Ding Xiaochen's lips slowly curled. Faced with a man that was about to die, his self-restraint was still quite good, and he did not lose composure just because he was egged on. "Ho ho!" Ling Han laughed, expressing all his disdain in this derisive laugh. Even if Ding Xiaochen was trained in restraint, he easily exploded in fury because of this condescending laugh. His expression was filled with rage, and he forced himself to take a few deep breaths, telling himself that there was no need to drop down to the level of this brat, and he just had to kill him. "You are asking for your own suffering." He moved, and pressed out a palm. Boom! Origin power solidified into a giant hand, a black sun shining on every fingertip, which looked incredibly bizarre. Ling Han puffed up his cheeks and blew. With an exhalation, those 5 suns were all extinguished, and this giant hand also turned back into origin power, which then dissipated. This. Everyone was shocked, as if they had just discovered Ling Han's presence, and surveyed him continuously. Was this really a cultivator in the high extreme of the Genesis tier? He had not even reached the peak stage yet. At most, he could only be in the late stage. 3.5 stars aptitude was really so frightening. Even Ding Hu couldn't help but open his eyes as he surveyed Ling Han. Actually, with his strength, it was the same whether he opened his eyes or not. Wherever his divine sense could reach, he could see. But because this scene was too shocking, he was emotionally stirred, and opened his eyes once more. Ding Xiaochen also looked at Ling Han in shock. He did not dare believe that his move had been so simply and easily resolved. Was this 3.5 stars aptitude? Allowing him to oppose him even with the gap of a minor level between them. Fuck, was it that exaggerating? He took a deep breath, and told himself not to be affected. He had yet to use any secret technique. If he used it, how easy would it be to suppress a high extreme Genesis tier? You've got some skill, but in front of me, putting aside the fact that you are only in the high extreme, even if you were in the consummate level, you would still be suppressed. Pa! Just when Ding Xiaochen had finished his words, he received a harsh slap. It naturally was delivered by Ling Han. This was definitely deliberate. He had waited until Ding Xiaochen finished speaking to slap him. This face slap was really painful and loud. Ding Xiaochen roared out angrily. His hair fluttered, his eyes becoming completely white like blazing lightning. This time, he was really and truly in a thunderous rage. Having his face slapped in public like this, how could he endure any more? "Die!" he shouted loudly, his whole person being engulfed in the power of time, and charged towards Ling Han. He was going to crush this damn guy. Chapter 1678. Collapse at the first blow. Ding Xiaochen charged over, wrapped in the power of time. He looked as if no attack could touch him. Ling Han gave a casual flick of his finger. Pooh! Sword light slashed onto Ding Xiaochen's body, yet was easily swallowed by the power of time, and he was completely unaffected. No wonder the Ding clan had deliberately targeted the Hu clan, and snatched away the secret technique of the Hu clan. This celestial technique was indeed powerful. When the power of time spread out, they could practically ignore the gap in battle prowess, allowing the user to become invincible. However, Ling Han, too, had a considerable number of celestial techniques in his grasp. Ha had even learnt the Tide of the Ages as well, and had more so obtained the complete secret technique from Hu Yu. In terms of the grasp of this type of celestial technique, Ling Han was not inferior to the Ding clan at all. The difference lay in the fact that his present cultivation level was still too low, so he was unable to completely execute the might of this celestial technique to the fullest. Haha, In front of the ultimate technique of our Ding clan, what can you do? Ding Xiaochun's confidence returned, and he called out arrogantly. Though killing Ling Han could not possibly make up for the humiliation that he had suffered, if he allowed Ling Han to stay alive, he would probably be unable to raise his head ever again in this lifetime. Ling Han smiled slightly, and flicked another finger. Xiao, another flash of sword light streaked past, but this time it forcibly penetrated the power of time covering Ding Xiaochun. Still, because its might had been weakened slightly, it only managed to tear open this layer of power of time before vanishing. But it was this one move that terrified Ding Xiaochun to the extreme. He hurriedly stopped, his expression revealing his extreme shock. The other party had actually broken through his power of time. Though he had not managed to wound him, if he had continued with another strike, he would have been in deep trouble. Impossible! When he used the Tide of the Ages, it should have aged any kind of attack. It should be known that he was a peak stage Saint King, and his cultivation level was already highest in this tier. If anyone wanted to suppress him in terms of regulations, that could only be accomplished by a severing mundane ancestor. How did Ling Han manage to do it? Not only was he stunned, Ding Hu also revealed a hint of surprise. He had a kind of feeling that Ling Han perhaps had not exerted his full effort yet. Without using his full efforts, he was already able to defeat a young prodigy of the Ding clan? And while he himself was only in the high extreme of the Genesis tier at that. Hiss, just what kind of freak was this? Ding Hu was slightly hesitant. Ordinarily, the Ding clan should try as much as possible to gain this kind of prodigy with 3.5 stars aptitude. But looking at the present situation, it seemed like this boy had a very large conflict with Ding Xiaochun. Then going by first impressions, this boy definitely did not have a favorable impression of the Ding clan. In future, even if they offered the same conditions to attract him, the possibility that Ling Han would lean towards the Long clan and the Duan clan was much greater. Since that was the case, a killing intent suddenly surged up in Ding Hu's heart. Mao Dai was a previous example. They allowed him to freely mature, and the result? He had now become a force that could become a threat to the 3 great clans by himself. Thankfully, he only had a daughter. If the Mao clan had also prospered, then it was possible that a 4th great force would appear in the Dark Moon City. The cake was only so big, and who would be willing to have others take a share of their own profits? The best scenario was for Ding Xiaochun to show his might and kill this brat. In any case, wasn't an accidentally fatal move a very common thing to happen in the tournament battles? After a moment of shock, Ding Xiaochun finally pulled himself together. He drew out a saber. The saber was dark green in color, and seemed to have been made from wood, but a frightening murderous aura immediately surged out the moment he drew this weapon. This murderous aura took the form of a giant tree, and what was shocking was the fact that the great tree was brandishing its vine-like branches, dancing around as if they were whips. Jade blood man-eating tree. Around them, many people exclaimed in shock, their faces green. This was a demonic tree that was fond of hunting humans and demonic beasts. When it was immobile, it was like any ordinary tree, but if anyone arrived at the base of the tree, the demonic tree would attack at the most unexpected moment, and wrap its vines around its prey. Furthermore, there were sharp spikes which could excrete poison and numb its target in an instant on its vines. Using the trunk of this tree as the main body, and sealing the spirit of the demonic tree within, the precious tool that was refined would also possess most of the might of the demonic tree. This was an extremely frightening god tool. The tournament battles did not forbid the use of weapons, because what the Dark Moon Army needed were soldiers that could kill others, and not cultivators that would be sparring and competing with others. Ding Xiaochun was instantly brimming with confidence now that he had his saber in hand. The saber's blade shone with green light, and even his face turned green from the glow. Previously, he had not encountered anyone that could match him yet, so he naturally had not even bothered to use the god tool, but now he was forced into it by Ling Han. He did not rush to attack. There was presently a green murderous aura surging out of the blade, spreading in all directions. This was the spirit of the jade blood man-eating tree. Because the process of refining it was extremely frightening, the spirit of the demonic tree was also filled with fury, and its killing intent was astonishing. Because he was the wielder, he was completely immune to this kind of murderous aura, but the others would be affected. Though the jade blood man-eating tree was a plant-type demonic breed, aside from the fact that it cultivated the wood element regulations by nature, it also had poison element regulations. This was its unique trait. Regulations had no form, and were fused within its spirit, so there was a strong poison mingled inside this murderous aura. Go die! Ding Xiaochen glared coldly at Ling Han and declared, when the spirit-severing saber appears, no one will stay alive. Ling Han laughed loudly. It is really too sad not to become a comedian with your talent. Listen to a piece of advice from me. From tomorrow onwards, it would be better for you to go to restaurants and inns in the city to have your own show. Stubborn. Ding Xiaochen used his origin power so that the might of the divine saber in his hands could be released even faster. Ling Han shook his head and said, At first, I wanted to see how much strength you actually had. I never thought that the basis of your confidence is a mere saber. I can't even be bothered to watch you continue your performance. His figure flashed, and he charged towards Ding Xiaochen. Lightning flash was used, and his speed was incredibly and extraordinarily fast. Even if he had not used it to its fullest, it was no longer something that Ding Xiaochen could catch up with, just like how he had received a slap from Ling Han, and still had not realized how he had been slapped even at this moment. When Ling Han's fist was about to punch Ding Xiaochen's face, only then did he become alert, but it was already too late for him to brandish his saber in a slash against Ling Han at this time. He could only produce a burst of speed, and retreat backwards quickly. But could this be a match for Ling Han's speed? Pang! Ding Xiaochen's face instantly received a solid punch, and he couldn't help but stumble backwards. However, he had not steadied his footing yet when Ling Han's second punch had already fallen. Pang pang pang. In just that short instant, he had already been hit with over a dozen punches. Collapsing at the first blow, Ling Han stated calmly, and as if providing evidence for his judgment, Ding Xiaochen's figure was sent flying before landing heavily on the ground. All around them, there was a dead silence. Even the other battles had all stopped, and everyone's attention was drawn here. Ding Xiaochen had really collapsed at the first blow. From the start to finish, Ling Han had only flicked his fingers and waved his fists around. He had not used any powerful technique at all, but what about Ding Xiaochen? He had used celestial techniques and a god tool, but he did not even manage to hold up to a single strike from Ling Han. Was this the gap between 3 stars and 3.5 stars of aptitude? Everyone was in disbelief. Perhaps if the two of them had the same cultivation level, this kind of difference was still possible, but Ding Xiaochen clearly had the advantage of a minor level, so how could such a situation possibly happen? Ding Xiaochen struggled to his feet, and pang, he was sent back to the ground with another blow from Ling Han. On the tournament stage, as long as one party had not collapsed or admitted defeat, the battle would continue. Ding Xiaochen was unwilling to admit defeat. He had already lost all his pride from being beaten by Ling Han, and if he was to admit defeat in public, then he would really be unable to hold his head high ever again. Chapter 1679. Completely shameless. But what was the point of forcefully enduring like this? Pang, pang, pang. Ding Xiaochen was continuously sent to the ground. His face already swollen horribly, and Ling Han was also very measured in his blows. He did not put too much strength so that Ding Xiaochen would pass out, but rather allowed him to maintain a completely conscious state. Would he admit defeat? Ding Xiaochen gritted his teeth. This was his final bottom line. He would definitely not speak up and admit defeat. Initially, Ling Han planned to continue playing around like this, but when he saw that there was not enough time left, he shot out a kick and sent Ding Xiaochen out of the battle area. According to the rules, this naturally was judged as a loss. Humph! Ding, who was extremely displeased, and suddenly opened his eyes, glaring at Ling Han. Ling Han couldn't help but take a step back, his face suddenly turning pale. He had been struck by Ding Hu. This strike had no form or shape, and was only a humph, yet contained Ding Hu's martial intent. Just how powerful was a severing mundane ancestor? If they had been in the ancient realm, then a mere thought would be enough to shatter a great star. And now, this kind of psychic blade had struck Ling Han, so how could it possibly be a pleasant feeling? Fortunately, Ding Hu did not dare commit murder in public, so he could only use limited power, and Ling Han's physique was astonishingly strong, so this psychic blade actually only caused minor injuries to Ling Han. Ding Hu's expression involuntarily turned slightly ugly. His initial intention had been to cause a severe injury to Ling Han. This kind of result caused him both displeasure and shock. This young man's physique was too shocking. He only suffered minor injuries even after taking a psychic blade from him. With his identity, if his first attack had missed, he should not have been so shameless to make another move, but Ding Hu did not have that kind of magnanimous bearing, and couldn't help but throw out another psychic blade. Pooh! Ling Han's chest instantly split open, and blood gushed out. Even his half-star divine metal-level physique could not block such a blow. The severing mundane tear was too strong. Ling Han stumbled. He knew this must have been a move from Ding Hu. In this place, only this severing mundane tear could have posed a threat to him. He only felt an agony in his chest like a flame burning. Ding Hu was really too despicable. Not only did he wound him with a psychic blade, he also inserted a sliver of his own martial intent into the blade. His purpose was to torment him for a few decades. This was a warning. To dare wound a member of his Ding clan, this would be the punishment. Of course, if Ling Han encountered other severing mundane tier elites, he could ask the latter to help him dissipate this martial intent, but the question here was, how many people would be willing to offend the Ding clan for the sake of a nameless nobody? Every elite had their unique martial intent, and there were only 30+ severing mundane tiers in Dark Moon City, so they were all familiar with each other. Ling Han steadied his footing, and looked towards Ding Hu. His eyes burning with blazing fighting spirit as well as a kind of powerful disdain. Your Ding clan only knows how to bully others with your superior might. A so-called severing mundane ancestor actually made a move on a junior twice, and was actually shamed into anger just because he had missed. How utterly shameless. On the other side, the Empress was also bursting with killing intent. Not one person actually dared to stand within 30 meters of her. They had all stepped back, or their hearts would have burst. However, the Empress did not move rashly. It was true that she was proud, but if she had been a rash fool, how could she have possibly sat on the throne of the Chaotic Star's majestic empire for 1,000,000 years? She would have long since been taken into someone else's harem as a prized possession. And now, she had to bear it. The Empress clenched her hands into fists, her beautiful eyes flickering with the flames of rage. If looks could kill, then Ding Hu would have already died a few thousand times over. A dead silence fell. Anyone could guess that this had been a move from Ding Hu, but who would dare to rebuke a severing mundane ancestor? Even Mao Shuyu was hesitant. Her father had strictly told her to conduct herself virtuously, and not to have any kind of involvement with the three great clans. Ding Hu calmly said, in the previous battle, 3590 has been sent out of the grounds by 5574, but 5574 has also been seriously wounded by 3590, and this battle would barely be considered a victory for 5574. 3590 was Ding Xiaoqin's serial number, and 5574 was Ling Han's. Going by Ding Hu's explanation, Ding Xiaoqin was actually more or less Ling Han's equal. Though he had been sent flying, he had also wounded Ling Han severely. Fuck, could he be any more shameless? It clearly was Ding Xiaoqin that had been terribly defeated, and you were also the one who had wounded Ling Han, yet actually shamelessly placed this merit under Ding Xiaoqin's name. Correct. Ding Hu making a move on Ling Han was bullying the weak with his superior strength, but in Ding Xiaoqin's case, that was a battle of equals. Though there was a gap of a whole minor level, it could just barely be considered just. The word merit was not used in an exaggerated manner. If it were not for the fact that Ding Xiaoqin had actually been sent flying out, Ding Xiaoqin might even distort the facts, and it was possible that he would judge this as Ling Han's loss. When Ding Hu finished his words, a commotion broke out among the 1,000 or so gathered here. They had seen some shameless people, but this was their first time that they had seen someone shameless to this extent. Humph! Ding Hu's eyes swept over them, and as a frightening intimidation surged out, it instantly suppressed everyone's displeasure. Who dared violate the authority of a severing mundane ancestor? Once again, a dead silence fell. Only then did Ding Hu nod in satisfaction, and declared, "Continue the challenges." When everyone heard this, their expressions shifted once more. What Ding Hu meant was there was no need to allow Ling Han to rest, and they could begin challenging Ling Han immediately. But Ling Han had just been severely wounded by a severing mundane ancestor, and was not even allowed the slightest bit of recovery time. How could he possibly be able to bear anyone's attacks? Even an eternal river tier would probably be able to defeat him. So ruthless! Everyone exclaimed in their minds. Though Ding Xiaoqin had been defeated, and had even lost the ability to fight any longer, and thus had no hope of claiming the position of a captain. Ding Hu had no plans of allowing Ling Han to become a captain, either. Ding Hu broke into a faint smile. Merely a nameless nobody, and he thought he could oppose the Ding clan. What a joke. He had 10,000 ways that he could kill Ling Han with. After a momentary silence, the battle continued, but Ding Hu's expression was still incredibly dark because though Ling Han was proudly standing there, bleeding non-stop, no one actually moved to challenge him. These people. Ding Hu only felt that his authority had received a great provocation. He already said that they could challenge him, but there was not a single person that made a move on Ling Han. Did these people plan to rebel against him? His eyes swept over them, and everyone lowered their heads, not daring to make eye contact with him. Everyone had a bottom line, and what Ding Hu had done today had already crossed everyone's bottom line. Cultivators only respected true strength. If Ding Hu had called out anyone to challenge Ling Han, then no one would have been able to endure such pressure, and would definitely have been compelled to move. However, the law did not punish numerous offenders. Ding Hu couldn't punish all of them, right? Then, it was natural that no one would step out to challenge Ling Han. Even if they could defeat Ling Han now, they would be scorned by others in future. Who would respect such a captain? Everyone did not dare oppose a severing mundane ancestor directly, yet they were using this kind of method to express their support for Ling Han. Ling Han's figure stood upright, unbending and unyielding. At present, my strength is inferior to yours, but if you want to suppress me, I will definitely not allow your wish to come true. Even minor characters had their own backbone. They could be defeated, but would definitely not abandon their pride. However, Ling Han's injuries were actually not as severe as Ding Hu thought. He had already channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid to control his injuries, but because of Ding Hu's martial intent, he could not completely heal them. This would require him to enter the Black Tower, and have the power of the Black Tower erase his martial intent. The present Ling Han still had 70% of his battle prowess, at least. And even this was enough to overwhelm all other Genesis tiers aside from the Empress. Very soon, an hour had passed. Normally, since Ding Hu had already said that challenges could immediately begin, then the countdown should have begun from that moment, and Ling Han would already be the first that has risen above the others, and become the first captain of this selection of reserve troops. However, Ding Hu sent a warning gaze at Tu Kong, signaling that the countdown of 1 hour was only to begin now. This man was already completely shameless, and Ling Han ignored him completely. When he had gained enough strength, he would raise the Ding clan to the ground, and by then, he would really want to see what kind of expressions would be on the faces of these bastards of the Ding clan. Chapter 1680. If the price is high enough. Ding Hu's expression was dark. As a severing mundane tier, it had already been a very long time since he had such an unpleasant experience, but now a mere Genesis tier actually caused him to bear such a powerful killing intent. He declared, "For those who can obtain the position of captain this time round, I will present a reward of 10 star stones." Star stones were a natural resource unique to the celestial realm, and were made from the shards of stars above the 9 heavens, which were also meteorites. The 9 heavens of the celestial realm could not be ascended. As legend had it, only celestial kings could ascend, so one could only wait until the shards of stars in the skies fell down as meteorites to be able to refine starstones out of them. The Tao of heaven and earth were contained within, and were of great help to the advancement of cultivation level for cultivators. Including the Dark Moon Army, every soldier of the enlisted army could obtain 2 starstones as their pay, and every member of the reserve troops would earn 1. Even a captain could only earn 2, which was the same as any soldier of the official army. And now Ding Hu promised 10 star stones. This reward could be claimed to be quite generous. Don't think that time was cheap in the celestial realm. Because competition in the celestial realm was cruel, time would only be more valuable. What was Ding Hu's purpose? Everyone was clear. He wanted to use wealth to get others to make a move on Ling Han. If I exert pressure, you all think that the law does not punish numerous offenders, and ignore me completely, but what about 10 star stones? Who could refuse? To Ding Hu, taking out 100 star stones naturally was only a small token, merely the cultivation resources for 1 month for a severing mundane tier. If the price was high enough, there would be those who were willing to be bought. Previously, no one had made any move. Firstly, even if they defeated Ling Han, they would be uncomfortable even in the position of captain. It was like there was a fire lit under their behinds. But it was a different story with a reward of 10 star stones. A lot of people were willing to give it a try. There would be one person that would be eliminated from the reserve troops every single year. What if they were eliminated in their very first year? Hence, 10 star stones were still considerably valuable. Xiao, a person shot out, and stood in front of Ling Han. It was a man whose looks were not outstanding. He clasped his hands in Ling Han's direction and asked, "Brother, I have no wish to wound you, so could you admit defeat on your own volition?" Ling Han's eyes burned fiercely. Facing a man that planned to take advantage of his critical state, what need was there for him to be polite? "Scram," he stated calmly. "You take my kindness as ill intention?" The man smirked coldly, and suddenly shot out, charging towards Ling Han. As he saw it, with how severely wounded Ling Han was at present, he would be able to defeat him with a light blow. Thus, he even cautiously controlled his strength to avoid killing Ling Han with a single blow. Ling Han moved, and gripped that man's neck with a single move. Then he slammed him into the ground. Pang! That man was instantly sent heavily onto the ground. He had not even managed to get up when Ling Han had already stepped on his head. "Take off your foot!" The man roared in fury. This was too humiliating. He pushed with both hands against the ground, wanting to stand back up. Ling Han ignored him. He only looked at Ding Hu, who was on the high platform. Then, with a slight effort of his right foot, pang, the man's head below his foot was forcibly stomped into the hard rock. It should be known that the rocks here were extremely hard, and were completely capable of sustaining a powerful barrage from a Genesis tier. Yet Ling Han actually stomped a man's head in with one foot. What kind of concept was that? The arms of the man below his foot immediately drooped lifelessly as he had directly passed out. Ling Han's foot was placed on that man's head, while his eyes were fixed on Ding Hu. His provocation was leaping from his action. "Come on then, what other tricks do you have? I will take all of them on." How domineering. Everyone paled in silence. This brat was really fierce to actually dare to oppose a vice commander publicly like this. Could it be that he did not know that this vice commander would be their overseer for as long as 100 years here? If you were not eliminated, then you would have to live under his shadow for the next 100 years. But even more people could feel their blood burn hot, feeling that this was what a true man was, and this was what a true cultivator should be like. The fury of even an ordinary man could spill blood in all directions. Ding Hu's little finger involuntarily moved. This was a signal that he was close to being unable to control his killing intent. But if he dared make a move to kill at this moment, he definitely would be targeted by the Long clan and Duan clan. It was not impossible that he would be punished with death, even. The relations between the three great clans definitely could not be considered amiable, especially with the Ding clan's precedent. They had caused another prestigious clan, the Hu clan, to suffer a destructive calamity, so who would not guard against them? There will be a chance, there will be many chances in future. Ding Hu told himself mentally. He closed his eyes once more, ignoring Ling Han's provocation. He actually did not know what was going on. The moment he set eyes on Ling Han, he felt dislike for him. Otherwise, how could he have so quickly forced a 3.5 stars aptitude prodigy onto the opposing sides of the Ding clan? Perhaps he had seen the hatred that Ling Han bore towards the Ding clan in his eyes. After an hour, another greedy man moved to attack Ling Han, thinking that his might was only short-lived, and that it was impossible for him to continue such a performance. But the result was still the Sami was pressed down onto the ground by Ling Han with a single move, and had his head stomped into rock. There really was no one else that was this domineering. After this, no one else dared challenge Ling Han. He was too powerful. Before the 3 days' time had passed, the 10 captains had actually all emerged. Everyone had eyes they could see with. Those who could successively win over a dozen battles were definitely overwhelmingly strong, so it would be better for them to avoid seeking their own suffering. Next, it was the allocation of members for the 10 troops. Every person could choose to follow any of the captains, and the captain could also choose whether to take them in or otherwise. This was a two-sided decision. When everyone had made their choice, those remaining would be randomly stuffed into the troops that did not have the full 100 whether they liked it or not. Ling Han stood, his blood still flowing profusely. The martial intent of severing mundane tier was wreaking havoc in his blood and flesh, and even the indestructible Heaven Scroll was unable to expel it. This gap in cultivation level was really too wide. He was like a lone wolf that had been injured and was bleeding, yet his fighting spirit burned even fiercer than before, and was more frightening now. The Empress naturally chose him to be her captain without hesitation, but aside from her, no one else dared come over to his side. Who dared to offend Ding Hu? Previously, it could be claimed that the law did not punish numerous offenders, but if anyone were to take the initiative to follow Ling Han now, then wasn't that a direct slap to Ding Hu's face? Who would dare slap the face of a severing mundane ancestor? Compared to the other captains, who had many visitors, Ling Han's side was deserted. An indifferent smile hung on his lips, and he was indeed uncaring. He merely wanted to make use of the Dark Moon Army to fit in with the Celestial Realm, and did not have any other thoughts aside from that. Since he had no particular ambition, he naturally feared nothing. Of course, he definitely had a clear short-term goal by now, and that was to destroy the Ding clan. The other 9 captains soon finished their recruitment, and the remaining 98 people had no other alternative, and were forcibly listed under Ling Han's banner. At this time, they had no further need to use serial numbers, and registered their own names and personal information. Ling Han found out that assassin that looked like a kid was named Wei Bo, the woman who used the corrosive power of darkness was called Qin Henyu, and the old man covered in black scales was called Luo Xinyang. Because Ling Han's subordinates were all those remaining after the best had been chosen, their quality was naturally also the most inferior. It was inevitable that they were all sighing in despair. It looked like they would all be bullied by the others in the upcoming 100 years. Chapter 1681. A mission has arrived. The fact that close to 1,000 people would be divided into 10 teams was naturally not merely for the convenience of administration. There was another purpose. Theoretically, they would be able to earn a starstone as their yearly pay. But there was another rule among the reserve troops, and that was that there would be a major tournament held among the 10 teams every year. The team that ranked the lowest among the 10 teams would lose their pay for the next year, and it would be presented as a reward for the top team. Ling Han's subordinates were all poor quality, and were made up of the worst members. How could their team possibly compare with the other 9 teams? Weren't they destined to be the lowest rank? Thus, every single one of them looked depressed. Some even thought of withdrawing. Why shouldn't they take the initiative to be eliminated in the next year? They could wait another 100 years to be enlisted in the army. Ling Han did not say anything. In truth, he could defeat a team of 100 all by himself. Furthermore, he was the Alchemy Emperor. There was no lack of alchemical pills here. He could completely refine a great volume of high-grade divine pills. As long as they followed his lead loyally, Ling Han could guarantee that he would not disappoint any single one of them. Of course, those who merely wanted to take advantage of him could just stay as far away from him as possible. Ding Hu glanced coldly at Ling Han. He would make use of his methods to ensure that Ling Han disappeared as soon as possible. They all entered the camp. Every person had a single room to rest in. Actually, they did not have much to do usually, and would simply be trained in the art of cooperative attacks. Occasionally, they would have practical battles to destroy a band of mountain bandits that were not too powerful. However, this kind of practical battle would ordinarily be scheduled for 10 years later. Without proper coordination, people would die too fast in a major battle. After Ling Han and the Empress entered their room, they immediately entered the Black Tower. Ling Han used the power of the Black Tower to erase the martial intent that Ding Hu had left in him. Once this power of regulation had vanished, his physical body immediately recovered. The Empress's expression was icy, and she declared, "I want to go into seclusion and break through to the severing mundane tier within 3 years. 3 years later, there will not be a single living being left of the Ding clan." Someone dared to wound her husband, so the Empress's killing intent was already blazing. "Don't!" Ling Han wrapped his arms around her and laid a kiss on her black locks. "If you simply focus on cultivation, you will be able to reach the peak stage of the consummate level of the Genesis tier, but if you want to break through to the severing mundane tier, you will have to go to a special place." Why was it said that the Saint King tier was the end of the road in the ancient realm? This was not because of natural talent or cultivation technique, but rather because one needed a special location in the celestial realm if he wanted to break through to severing mundane tier. He would only be able to interact with the prehistoric powers of the heavenly Tao, and deal a blow with the heavens will saber onto himself there. Otherwise, it was useless even if you had the aptitude of a celestial king. You would only be stuck on the level of Saint King tier. The Empress's fury did not lessen, and she said, "Then I will reach the consummate level of the Genesis tier as soon as possible." She was filled with confidence in herself. As long as she had reached the peak stage of the Saint King tier, she would be able to successfully undergo the first severance, and become a severing mundane tier. Ling Han shook her head. Breaking through to the severing mundane tier is not that easy. What is the severing mundane tier? That is to sever one's mortal bonds and completely merge with the great Tao. In other words, the more reluctant you are to sever the mortal bond that you will sever, the more completely you will be able to merge with the Tao of heaven and earth. This was what the heavenly emperor of thunder and fire had told Ling Han alone. Severing mundane tier had to undergo 4 severances in total, but putting aside 4 severances, even when undergoing the first severance, the majority of elites would become incredibly cold and detached because they had already cast away something that they cared most about. Usually, this first severance would be dealt to kinship, love, and friendship. Only now did the Empress reveal an expression of shock. For her, the most important thing now was Ling Han. If she was to deal the first severance to love, she would rather die. But if she brought such an obsession to break through to the severing mundane tier, she might kill herself in the process, and disappear for eternity in this world. How could it be so easy to achieve immortality? How could it be possible that they could accomplish such a feat without having to sacrifice something? The Empress thought for a moment and said, "If I had to deal such a blow to myself, then I would rather not become immortal and be together with you for this lifetime." The severing mundane tier did not necessarily mean that one had to sever love. Anything that one valued could be severed, but when things had really reached that step, under the torture of the furnace of the heaven and earth, most people would face their own conscience directly, and would unconsciously sever their most important mortal bond. Who could maintain a clear mind in front of the great Tao? Only a prodigy among prodigies could do so. Hence, if we want to sever our mortal bonds, we have to plan carefully. Ling Han embraced the Empress's waist. It was not only her. Every single person in the Black Tower had to make their own preparations well. Otherwise, they would easily sever the emotional bonds with their family and love. Ling Han arrived at the base of the reincarnation tree. Everyone was continuously cultivating. The Black Tower had harvested the spiritual chi of the celestial realm, and added with the help of the reincarnation tree, everyone could be considered to be progressing in leaps and bounds. After Ling Han explained the situation to them, he and the Empress exited the Black Tower. The people inside could not come out yet. No matter what, it would have to wait until they could merge the regulations of the 2 realms. After a night of rest, training began. With teams as the unit of measure, the 10 teams were assigned to be led by 10 military instructors. The military instructor for Ling Han's team was Wu Jing, a middle-aged man with a rounded, plump build and a peak stage Saint King. "You pieces of trash, useless fleas, wanting me to train you is completely an insult to me." As Wu Jing trained them, he showered them with a torrent of abuse. "I gave up the option of staying with my comrades in arms to train you merely to watch your monkey acts. Trash. Idiot. Even pigs are 100 times smarter than you all." His insults rained down. Whether you performed well or poorly, you would first be treated to a dose of abuse. In the first place, the team's morale was already very low due to following Ling Han, and now with a torrent of abuse from the instructor, they naturally felt even worse, and wanted nothing more than to immediately withdraw. But it was not easy for them to enter, and leaving was not that easy either. By now, they only had 2 ways they could leave. Firstly, one person would be eliminated every year, and secondly, they could die for various reasons and leave in death. By now, everyone was targeting that single place for elimination, so their performance was naturally as bad as possible. However, merely on the 3rd day, Wu Jing announced with a strange expression on his face that they had been assigned a mission to suppress bandits, and were to set out immediately. "What so fast?" Everyone exchanged looks, all feeling that this was too abrupt. They had just learned a little of cooperative attacks, and they could not be considered to be able to cooperate with each other at all, nor were they able to coordinate with one another, yet they were actually told to suppress bandits. This was practically sending them to their deaths. Perhaps they could succeed, but the price they had to pay would definitely be very astonishing. Maybe half of the people here would not be able to make it back alive. They were not fools, and immediately guessed that this had to be Ding Hu's scheme to target Ling Han, and they were merely cannon fodder. He couldn't directly send Ling Han to his death, right? Ling Han, you are the captain. This mission must be completed perfectly. Wu Jing handed him a jade scroll. The details on this group of mountain bandits are in here. They are merely a mob of misfits, and there are only 10 peak stage Saint Kings. Thus, the losses on this mission must be limited to less than 10, and if this number is exceeded, you will be punished by martial law when you return. So vicious. Chapter 1682. Easily resolved. Ling Han definitely did not believe Wu Jing's words. Perhaps he was merely passing on a message, and even he himself was not clear about the true strength of that band of mountain bandits. But Ling Han was sure that since this was Ding who schemed to target him, how could he possibly allow him to so easily pass the test? This band of mountain bandits had to be very strong. Even if they could not kill Ling Han, they would be capable of causing serious damage to his team, and even if Ling Han returned, he would be punished heavily. Then, he could simply find an excuse to get rid of Ling Han in prison. Ling Han shook his head. As a great severing mundane ancestor, did he have to go to such trouble to deal with him? This was also because the 3 great clans impeded each other. Otherwise, Ding Hu definitely did not have to go to so much trouble. He could kill him as he liked, and who would dare say anything? A military order could not be disobeyed. The team of 100 set out, and even their military instructor could not follow, which made it clear that this was a trap to the fullest. Yet Ling Han was filled with confidence. Ding Hu had miscalculated 2 points. Firstly, Ling Han's injuries had healed, and his battle prowess had completely recovered. Secondly, the Empress also had incredible battle prowess. Putting aside the fact that the 2 of them would be working together, either one of them could easily overwhelm any Genesis tier. Unless male and female Saint tiers of the great sex appeared, who could match these 2? They had both formed 10 million stars when they were in the Eternal River tier. No matter how fierce their enemy was, one of the 2 would be attacking, while the other would be on defense, which was enough to perfectly deal with every enemy. However, though Ling Han and the Empress had confidence, that was not the same for the others. Rather than running to their deaths, they might as well become deserters. Worst come to worst, they would just have to never return to Dark Moon City. The moment they exited the city, there were some that planned to sneak away. Ling Han moved, apprehended 13 people who attempted to flee, and pushed out the 2 leaders. They were the ones who had established contact with the others, which led to this incident of army desertion. I know that everyone does not have much confidence in this mission, but I will make a declaration. As long as I am here, nothing will be a problem. This time, I will only give a light punishment as warning, but if anyone has any further plans of deserting, then do not blame me for dealing with you as per martial law, Ling Han stated menacingly. Everyone pursed their lips. You say it so easily, but if we really fight with the mountain bandits, how are you going to guarantee our safety? But Ling Han's aggressive move had intimidated all of them. At least for the moment, no one dared desert the army. But the moment the battle began, they might take advantage of the chaos to flee. They exited the city gates and headed towards the chaotic Wind Mountains. It was a total of 7 days' journey from Dark Moon City, and there was an important trade route at the base of the chaotic Wind Mountains, which connected Dark Moon City with Bayou City. And now a group of mountain bandits had set up camp in the chaotic Wind Mountains, and they would occasionally raid the coming and going traveling merchants. In truth, there were mountain bandits every year, and the traveling merchants had long since become used to them. Furthermore, most mountain bandits would not kill all of them, and would only ask for some passage fees. Otherwise, if there were malicious battles, there would definitely be deaths and injuries, so how could it be that the mountain bandits would not fear death too? However, this band of mountain bandits was different. They were vicious and merciless, and would kill every single traveling merchant they came across, not leaving a single one alive. Furthermore, they were very cunning too. If the traveling merchants hired powerful guards, they would choose to avoid them, but if they could succeed, they would eliminate the entire group of traveling merchants without hesitation. Ling Han had already drawn up a strategy on their way there. They would all disguise themselves as merchants, and lure the mountain bandits to make a move on them. To guarantee that the mountain bandits would move out, Ling Han even had the few peak stage Saint Kings hide in the carriages. However, this was actually unnecessary because there were not many elites among their team in the first place, and there were only a mere 6 peak stage Saint Kings. They drove their carriages, and did not hide their identities. They showed the banner of the Dark Moon Army, but for anyone who had the slightest bit of experience, they would be able to confirm with a glance that this group were definitely rookies. Added with their bountiful cargo, this was practically making an announcement to others to come and rob them. Though this plan was very simple, it was very practical. They had not stepped into the area of the chaotic wind mountains for very long when Ling Han discovered that someone was tailing them. He even deliberately had the fleet of carriages speed up, making it clear that he knew that the situation was not good, and was planning to quickly flee. This move was very useful. Another 4 hours later, a group of people had charged out from two sides, blocking their advance and any route of retreat. We want only valuables, so obediently submit yourselves to capture. When we leave, we will naturally set you all free. A bandit declared smilingly. This naturally was a lie. If anyone really surrendered themselves to be captured, then their fate would definitely be death. The Empress stood up. With her prideful personality, she naturally was not suited to protect others, so she was in charge of offense, while Ling Han was responsible for defense. The mountain winds blew past, and the Empress's long skirts fluttered. The fabric wrapped tightly around her slender frame, showing her perfect, flawless figure. Instantly, a round of people swallowing their drool was heard. "Beauty, take off your veil and give us a look," a mountain bandit demanded with a whistle. "Ninth, who knows if this woman has an ugly face? Just for this kind of figure, no matter how ugly she looks, I want her. Worst comes to worst, I'll just cover her face. With the lights out, what would be the point no matter how beautiful she is?" Ha ha ha. The mountain bandits all erupted in raucous laughter, staring at the Empress pervertedly. Every time they had a raid, if there were any women among the traveling merchants, they would definitely suffer their various asterisk. Xiao with a flash, the Empress had already charged out. Her life philosophy was extraordinarily simple. If she was not happy, she'd just kill whatever made her unhappy. A human head flew into the skies, and they could see that the Empress was standing behind that ninth. The latter was only left with a headless body, and fresh blood was still gushing from his neck. The mountain bandits were all shocked. What astonishing speed, and what frightening strength. "Woman, you are quite courageous to kill one of our own." A man who looked to be the leader stepped out. He looked at the Empress menacingly. "At first I planned to spare your life, but you are so determined to seek your own demise." He waved his hand and commanded, "Kill them all." The mountain bandits all shouted and charged out. Every 5 of them were a small team, forming a unique formation, cooperating well with each other, so whether it was attack or defense, their might was greatly increased. The Empress's figure trembled, and 9 doppelgangers split out. The 10 Empresses danced and flew around like butterflies, but wherever they passed, they would bring a reign of terror. One after another, the mountain bandits became corpses and collapsed. No one could take a second blow from the Empress, even if she had divided herself into 10 doppelgangers, and they began their respective slaughter. Seeing this scene, Ling Han's team finally flared up. So this band of mountain bandits were actually so weak. No, it was not that the mountain bandits were too weak, but rather that the Empress was too strong. Heavens, they had thought that only Ling Han was strong, but how could one person be able to eliminate all the mountain bandits no matter how strong he was? But now with the help of the Empress, it was a different story. With one on the offense and the other on the defense, it was enough to guarantee that none of them would die. Ling Han's previous promise had not been the slightest bit false. Charge! Chapter 1683. Capture all in one go. The Empress had gone on a rampage, while Ling Han was taking charge of the overall situation. His divine sense had spread out, and if any soldier encountered danger, he would strike out with the lightning sword technique. It was indescribably fast, and as long as the opponent was not a severing mundane tier, he would be able to save the person who was in danger. As time passed, everyone realized this fact. The new soldiers all felt revitalized. This was equivalent to having their safety assured, so they naturally all became brave. On the other hand, the mountain bandits' morale had declined greatly because they could not kill a single soldier of the Dark Moon Army, or even cause severe wounds, no matter what they did. Retreat! 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 The mountain bandit who looked to be their leader swiftly called out loudly, and he was the first to turn around and run. However, under the Empress's pursuit, who would be able to successfully flee? Very soon, this group of mountain bandits were all eradicated, leaving behind only 3 survivors for the purpose of interrogation. This was a full and complete victory, and there was not a single person who had suffered a serious injury on the side of the Dark Moon Army, merely a few who had sustained light injuries. If it had been an official troop, their military success might even not have been as excellent as theirs. Thus, everyone felt incredibly invigorated. They naturally knew that the reason that they had been able to win so easily was because of Ling Han and the Empress. After this battle, their confidence had also returned. So what if they were those that remained after the best had been chosen? As long as their captain and his wife were there, what team could possibly be a match for them? The strength of cultivators came through battles, and Ling Han had used this great victory to finally win the respect of all of his subordinates. Ling Han interrogated each of the 3 mountain bandits individually. This was not the whole band of mountain bandits. He had found out that the boss of the mountain bandits was named Zhang Wuxiang, and was extremely strong. In any case, the several deputies were no match for him at all. Additionally, the number of remaining mountain bandits was around 300 people. Ling Han immediately decided that the majority of their team would rest here, while he and the Empress would charge into the mountain bandits' lair, and eliminate all the mountain bandits. His decision faced the objection of all his teammates. They all thought that this was too dangerous. Aside from an incredibly strong chief among the mountain bandits, there were also 8 other deputy chiefs, and all of them were very powerful. Furthermore, there were more than 30 peak stage Saint King level mountain bandits, which had far exceeded the 10 that Wu Jing had said. It was too dangerous for just Ling Han and the Empress to barge into this kind of tiger's den. Captain, the strength of this band of mountain bandits is far above what the information that we have gotten predicted. There is no need for us to be forceful. It would be better to bring this information back, and we would definitely be accorded merit and not faulted for it. That's right, Captain. You have to think it through carefully before you act. Everyone advised. By now, they were all sincerely siding with Ling Han. This captain and his wife were too fierce. Who knew, maybe after a few tens of thousands or a few million years, they would become severing mundane tears, and their present-day friendship would be too valuable by then. Ling Han smiled, yet shook his head resolutely. He was definitely going to the mountain bandits' lair. Why? It was very simple. How many traveling merchants had this band of mountain bandits robbed? Furthermore, all of them had been robbed completely, and they had accumulated a great volume of wealth in a short few years' time. If he were to raid them now, then everything would be his. What benefits would merely reporting information bring him? He and the Empress set out. The 3 mountain bandits had already confessed the exact location of the mountain bandits' lair, so Ling Han and the Empress only had to travel according to the set route. With their present strength, they no longer feared any kind of trap or ambush. No matter what tricks the mountain bandits had, they could suppress all of them. The mountain path was difficult to walk, and if they chose to fly in the skies, the path would be covered by the dense forest, which would make it easy for them to lose their way. Thus, they spent slightly less than half a day's time to finally arrive at the bandits' stronghold. If they had not had the information that was given by those 3 mountain bandits, this place would have been really difficult to find. It was very covert. It was no wonder that even when large groups of traveling merchants hired a large number of elites to suppress them, it had been useless. The entrance to this mountain bandits' lair was especially secretive, and was between 2 rocks. One had to contract their build first to be able to squeeze in, and after they were through, they would immediately come up to a wide clearing. A massive valley appeared in front of them, and there was a great tree growing in the middle of the valley. The tree's huge crown had spread out, covering the whole valley completely. Thus, one would need a large amount of luck to discover the presence of this valley if he did not go through that previous passage. When they appeared, they immediately drew the attention of all the mountain bandits. We have intruders. I am about to die. How could this woman be so beautiful? Because only Ling Han was here, the Empress had removed her face veil, revealing her exquisite beauty, and true enough, this caused all the mountain bandits to stare besottedly at her. They didn't even know who they were anymore. Ling Han grinned menacingly. His fingers balled into a fist and then opened up again. Shua, he had shot out over a dozen flashes of sword chi. Pu. Immediately, 11 mountain bandits collapsed, their blood pooling onto the ground. In the celestial realm, Genesis tears were not considered much at all. Thus, no matter how many of them died, it would not cause the heaven and earth to grieve over their loss. Only when celestial kings died would it cause grief throughout the world. This entrance had a total of 12 mountain bandits, and there was still a perverted grin on the face of the only mountain bandit that remained alive, yet he suddenly broke into cold shivers and screamed in horror. He turned around and escaped, and as he ran, he released shouts of utmost terror, which instantly echoed throughout the entire valley. Ling Han had deliberately left a survivor so that he could draw out all the mountain bandits. He had not been merciful. This band of mountain bandits were too ruthless. They left no survivors every time they launched a raid. If any women fell into their hands, then their fate might as well have been death. They would suffer all kinds of torture before they would be killed. There was no need to have mercy on these animals. Very soon, mountain bandits came out of their stone and wooden huts one after another, every single one of them wielding weapons, and appearing incredibly fierce. Those who would become mountain bandits were basically those that had broken the law in the city, or might have been good people before, but were forced into the thieves' den by evil tyrants. However, after becoming mountain bandits, every single person here had buried their conscience, and did not shrink from committing any crime. Even if they had originally been good people, they would still lose themselves amidst bloodshed and slaughter, and their psyche would be distorted. They thought that they had suffered injustice, and would seek their revenge on innocents. What a beautiful woman! When they saw the Empress, every single mountain bandit was staring at her. The Empress's beauty could conquer all, and even in a situation in which she was the enemy, her beauty was capable of making everyone feel carefree and relaxed. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "The wife is mine, so you guys need not think about it. Which of you is Jiang Wuxiang? Come out and receive your death." "Haha, a minor character like you thinks you can alert our boss?" A middle-aged man walked out. He was a deputy chief of the mountain bandits, and could be considered a big shot even among peak-stage Saint Kings with his strength. He had also been tempered through innumerable years. It was easy to advance into the Genesis tier in the celestial realm, and it was also easy to reach the consummate level of the Genesis tier. Then they would have a long 4 billion years to temper their strength. Though most people were unable to survive the increasingly frightening immortal's tribulation, for those who could live more than 2 billion years, which of them did not possess incredibly strong abilities? The intruders were merely 2 great saints, and they actually dared to come here and mess around. "Haha, brat. Have you come to present your wife as a gift?" As this deputy boss spoke, it also caused the other mountain bandits to erupt in loud laughter. Pooh! Suddenly, blood spurted from his chest, spraying into the mouths of a few mountain bandits beside him who were still laughing, and covering their faces. These people immediately stopped laughing as they watched this deputy boss of theirs slowly slide onto the ground with an expression of horror, a smile still present on his features. Chapter 1684. Jiang Wuxiang. A big shot among peak-stage Saint Kings was actually insta-killed. Ling Han withdrew his fingers, smiled calmly, and declared, "Jiang Wuxiang, come out and meet me." All the mountain bandits exchanged looks, and the remaining several deputy chiefs all had menacing expressions as they declared, "We move together. Kill the man and capture the woman alive." Though they could feel that this was problematic, none of them could bear to kill the Empress. If such an exquisite beauty were to die, that would really be a great pity. However, there was no need for them to be so polite towards Ling Han. Boom, at least a few hundred mountain bandits leaped up, and launched an offensive against Ling Han. They had used their full strength, and multiple silvery rivers appeared, stars forming and destroyed within them. Multiple regulations appeared. After all, these mountain bandits had all reached the Genesis tier. Those that did not manage this were not even qualified to join them. Die! The Empress humphed, and her 9 doppelgangers appeared, releasing various powerful techniques. Divine light burst out and dazzled the entire valley, and every streak of light was fatal and deadly. Ling Han moved as well. Boom! A ball of flame burst out from within his body. It was like the flames of extermination, and was also like a cleansing flame that could cleanse all darkness and filth to welcome a new world. The 9 Heavens Flame. As Ling Han's cultivation level increased, the might of the 9 Heavens Flame had also become gradually stronger. This was one of the 9 great ancestral flames of the celestial realm, so how domineering was it? Boom, as the nine heavens flame rolled out over them, the mountain bandits only managed to release a terrible scream before they were immediately burnt into ashes one after another. Flee! Flee for your lives! It was only a few attacks, and all the mountain bandits' faces turned green as they all turned around and fled. This couple was practically like demons, and could not be matched. Virtue has its reward and evil has its retribution. This is the natural cycle of karma. Ling Han's hand stretched out, and the nine heavens flame wove a giant net above the valley, stopping every single mountain bandit from fleeing, while he and the Empress stood guard at the only land passage into the valley. They were planning to block their retreat and destroy them. We'll give it our all. The mountain bandits' eyes had all turned bloodshot, and they charged back. This time, they no longer went easy on the Empress, and even she became a target of their frenzied attacks. Compared with their lives, so what if she was an exquisite fairy? They were all desperate criminals, not romantics. Unfortunately, the power gap was really too wide, so even if they gave it their all, so what? This was a one-sided massacre, and neither Ling Han nor the Empress showed them any mercy. Ling Han despised these mountain bandits for their various acts of evil, and the Empress considered everyone else below her notice. Aside from Ling Han and those connected to Ling Han, any living being in this world was the same to her, as if they were only stray dogs. Killing these mountain bandits was just like killing a few ants to her, so what need was there for her to feel any kind of emotion? This massacre only lasted for 15 minutes, and all the mountain bandits were executed. Even the several deputy chiefs collapsed at the first strike. Pa 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 pa. And it was at this moment that a round of applause was heard. A scholar dressed in black walked out of a bamboo house. His complexion was very fair, and his features were very delicate. He appeared to be in his 30s. Jiang Wushang? Ling Han asked. That would be me. The black-robed scholar nodded, and appeared to be very bookish. Ling Han was slightly surprised. As he saw it, the leader of this band of vicious and fierce mountain bandits should be a coarse, rough barbarian. No matter what, he could not connect that image with this cultured scholar in front of him. Judging by your strength, I should not be able to survive this disaster today. However, before you make your move, I hope that the two of you can listen to my story. Jiang Wushang bowed towards the two of them. Ling Han was also quite curious himself and said, Please go on. Chapter 1685. A scroll that could not be opened. Charge! Jiang Wushang shouted loudly. He charged out, each of his hands becoming a sun, and shooting forth endless rays of light. He was a natural prodigy of cultivation. Even if he had not spent much effort on cultivation, his battle prowess was still frighteningly high. Every strike could cause the heaven and earth to pale. If he had been in the ancient realm, he could have destroyed a great star with a single breath. It had to be known that even if a small saint wanted to destroy a star, he would have to take a long time to build up enough power for a strong attack, so what kind of concept being capable of shattering a star with a single breath was? But in front of Ling Han, this was still insufficient. Putting aside the fact that Ling Han's battle prowess was invincible among the Genesis tiers, even if he did not fight back, how could Jiang Wushang manage to overcome his physique? However, Ling Han did not rush to attack. This was Jiang Wushang's final battle. He decided to let the latter unleash his full battle prowess, and end his life after he had fully expended himself. Jiang Wushang had absolutely no thought of loss or victory. He only wanted to fully display all the comprehension that he had accumulated in this lifetime, and with his strength, he could have eradicated this entire thieves' den all by himself, which was proof of how extraordinarily strong his battle prowess was. It was clear that he rarely fought. His every move was incredibly shaky, but this time, his only thought was fighting. With his talent, he swiftly washed away the shakiness of his techniques, and became proficient at them and merciless. Even Ling Han had the thought of treasuring his talent, but he forcibly suppressed this urge. Boom, the nine heavens flame leaped out, and as lightning flash was used, he confronted him directly. The tide of the ages could age all attacks, and his fist landed on Jiang Wushang's chest. Boom, the fist penetrated his heart and came out through the other side, yet not a single trace of blood could be seen on his fist. With the burning of the nine heavens flame, what blood could possibly be left? Jiang Wushang coughed up blood. He looked at Ling Han, and the light in his eyes dimmed, but a smile of relief broke out on his lips. Even he hated this kind of himself, but he did not dare to commit suicide, as his powerful hatred continuously castigated him. His lashing back at others so madly was in fact an attempt to seek his own death, hoping that an elite would appear and make the move he could not, and take his life for him. In this way, he would be able to reunite with his wife and son in the underworld. If there was a next life, they could become husband and wife, father and son once more. The 9 heavens flame burned furiously, turning Jiang Wuxiang into ashes, which returned back to nature. Ling Han was slightly silent for a moment, then turned around and grinned at the Empress. "We'll do some gathering and then go home." The Empress nodded. Because she only had Ling Han in her eyes, she naturally would not be emotionally affected by Jiang Wuxiang's story and death, but the phrase, "go home," immediately turned her into a tender little woman. The two of them gathered all the treasures in the mountain bandits' lair. There were a great number of alchemical pills, silk fabrics, saintly materials, and saintly medicines. When they found any godly metal, Ling Han would directly have the divine demon sword swallow them, and when they finished their rounds, the divine demon sword had actually advanced. Level 19. As expected, there were bountiful resources in the celestial realm, and it was considerably easy for it to reach level 20. But from godly metal to divine metal, every step was incredibly hard to take. Not only did the divine demon sword have to swallow a large volume of level 20 godly metal, it also needed to survive a test from the heaven and earth. Celestial tools were equivalent to being celestial king tier level, so how could it be so easily reachable? "Ling Han, come take a look at this thing," the Empress called out from nearby. This was where the mountain bandits stored their treasures. Some items had been divided among them, but most of the treasures were still dumped here, and had not been stored away in spatial tools. The Empress held a scroll in her hand. It was completely black, and was heavy in her grip. It was incredibly hard. This was definitely not paper, but rather was woven from the combination of some kind of animal fur and metallic thread. From the outside, the scroll was visibly rolled up in layers, and was finally tied up with a sash, but it could not be opened at all. It was like this was not a sash, but rather something that had been melded together with the scroll. No matter how much effort Ling Han put in, he could do nothing to it. Ling Han and the Empress exchanged a look, and could see the surprise in each other's eyes. This must have been made by an elite. It may only be a letter, but if one's level is not enough, you would not even be qualified to open it for a look, Ling Han said. It should be known that he was already the strongest elite beneath the severing mundane tier, yet was not qualified to even open a scroll for a look. The two of them did everything they could, but were still unable to succeed. "We'll keep it away first." Ling Han wanted to throw the scroll into the Black Tower, yet discovered, much to his surprise, that this could not be done, because he was unable to use his divine sense to wrap around this scroll. To use an analogy, his divine sense was like a net, and this scroll was like a heavy object that was trapped in the fishing net. It was so heavy that if he drew in the net, it would break through the net mesh and fall out. He could only keep the scroll on him, and his plans of using the Black Tower to open the scroll had failed. However, they really had a great harvest this time, and had gained more than 100 saintly medicines. If the mountain bandits had not expended them greatly, this number would have been far higher, and additionally, they also obtained a great amount of godly metal, but it had been swallowed by the divine demon sword. And there were also more than 1,000 star stones. They could help in the comprehension of Tao as well as large amounts of satin fabrics, which had been woven from the silk of Genesis tier-level demonic beasts. They were on the level of saintly material, and if they were used to make clothing, its defense would definitely be good. Ling Han was very satisfied. He would have been even happier if he had not heard Jiang Wuxiang's tragic story, but this strengthened his resolve to raze the Ding clan to the ground. Whether it was in the ancient realm or the celestial realm, Ling Han had not heard that the Ding clan had produced any kind of good people. What he had heard and experienced personally was all the Ding clan's domineering and overbearing nature. Ling Han and the Empress returned, and when everyone found out that the whole mountain bandits' lair had been destroyed by just the two of them, they erupted in loud cheers. Naturally, no one would insensibly talk about the spoils of the battle. On their way back, they publicly flew the banner of the Dark Moon Army, so they naturally did not have to pay any entrance fee when they entered into the city. They were directly allowed to pass, and returned to the army camp. Ling Han went to report the combat results to Wu Jing. He skipped the details, and only said that this group of mountain bandits was really too weak, and they had easily wiped them out. Only 7 of their team of 100 had suffered light injuries, and not only were there no deaths, there were even no major injuries. This kind of military success stunned Wu Jing. He personally inspected the team himself, and looked at the large amount of corpses and weapons that they had brought back. There was no evidence more solid than this. He went to report to Ding Hu, but a command was passed down only after a short while, demanding that Ling Han hand over all the spoils of their battle. The reason was that they were the losses of Dark Moon City, and naturally had to be confiscated. Chapter 1686. Great Commander Mao. Ling Han immediately went to seek out Mao Shuyu. There was only one person that could influence the transfer of vice commanders, and furthermore, it was a transfer between 2 different factions. Mao Dai. Great Commander Mao. That's right. I was the one who reported the situation to father. Mao Shuyu nodded. She indignantly declared, "No need to thank me. I just don't like that guy. Tui. And he is a so-called severing mundane ancestor? To actually act like such a bully." Ling Han chuckled and said, "I still have to thank you for doing me such a huge favor." "Oh right. Father said that if you have time, pay him a visit," Mao Shuyu continued. Ling Han paused. He was beaten down on by Ding Hu, making it so that no one was willing to get involved with him. If it had not been because of the rules, he would have more or less been a commanding officer that had no army. He would only have 1 soldier under his command, that was the Empress, and they would have become a husband and wife army. But even so, he had still been ostracized. Just like Ding Hu had said previously, every captain would be rewarded with 10 star stones, and the other 9 had all obtained their rewards, and he was the only one who had not. Could he go and ask for his reward from Ding Hu? He would definitely be humiliated by the latter. Even if Ling Han had shown powerful strength in the previous mission to suppress the mountain bandits, and won the respect of his subordinates, when they returned to the army camp, everyone automatically separated themselves from him. There was nothing that could be done about it. Who would dare draw the notice of a severing mundane ancestor? Perhaps Ling Han would succeed one day, but from the Genesis tier to severing mundane tier, even the most awesome person would need tens of millions of years to accumulate strength. Could Ling Han really manage to survive such a long period of time? But right at this moment, Mao Dai actually asked Ling Han to pay him a visit. Though he said that it was just a visit, it was also a show for the other, Sid implied. I, Mao Dai, am optimistic about this brat's future. Who was Mao Dai? A 3rd Severance elite and an awesome character that could very possibly advance into the 4th Severance. If he supported Ling Han fully, what was Ding Hu worth? How could it be that the Ding clan would become hostile with Mao Dai because of this issue, and push him towards the other 2 great clans? Ling Han smiled slightly, and said, "There is no better day than today, so let's just make it today." Sure. Mao Shuyu nodded. Come with me. Father is also very curious about you. He keeps feeling that I have been exaggerating, and that you are not that strong. The 2 of them exited the campgrounds. At first, they would not have been able to leave so directly, but Mao Shuyu's identity was special, so she could simply throw out Mao Dai's name to open doors for her, scaring the various military instructors into a daze, and they could only let them go. Ding Hu was suddenly replaced. Anyone could guess that this was Mao Dai's doing. Since Lord Mao's eyes were already cast in this direction, whose heart would not tremble? This was a 3rd Severance elite, and furthermore one that had boundless future prospects. In future, he could advance into the 4th Severance, and be an equal to the ancestors of the 3 great clans, becoming one of the strongest of Dark Moon City. Mao Dai naturally was overseer in the Dark Moon army, and not this small camp of reserve troops. There were a total of 9,000 people in the whole Dark Moon army, 3,000 in each of the 3 armies: Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army, and Vermilion Bird Army. Additionally, there were around 100 substitute troops. Because there would be losses every year in the Dark Moon army, it was necessary to get replacements from these substitute troops, and the source of the substitute troops was naturally the reserve troops. These substitute troops were under the jurisdiction of Zhang Chong. He was Mao Dai's sole disciple, and had long since reached peak stage Saint King tier. It was said that he had a chance of breaking through to the severing mundane tier, and was waiting for the opening of the mortality barrier pool to use the Tao of heaven and earth there to sever his mortal bonds. Mao Shuyu brought Ling Han into the army camp. The people here clearly recognized her, and nodded in acknowledgement when they saw her. They did not even ask any questions. True, Ling Han was only a great saint. How could it be that anyone would worry that he would dare to mess around here? There was a courtyard in the army camp. It did not look very big from the outside, yet it was a completely different world inside. There were mountains and lakes, and it was a utopia. This was a spatial god tool, just that the god tool itself was larger and had been built in the form of a courtyard. Junior sister. A person was seated at the entrance. When he saw Mao Shuyu approach, he immediately bounced up and looked at Ling Han with eyes filled with warning, brimming with a hidden meaning. This woman is mine, so don't attempt to take her from me. This man was Zhang Chong, the only disciple of Mao Dai. Senior brother. Mao Shuyu greeted sweetly. She saw this senior brother as her actual brother. Because her father had always focused on cultivation, it could be claimed that the time Zhang Chong spent with her was even more than what time Mao Dai had spent with her. Ling Han also smiled and said, "Greetings, brother Zhang." Zhang Chong showed a sliver of displeasure. "You are merely a great saint, yet I am a saint king. Even if you do not address me as a senior, you should still call me Lord Zhang, right?" "Is father cultivating?" Mao Shuyu asked. "He just finished cultivating, and is presently drinking tea." Zhang Chong looked towards Mao Shuyu, his displeased expression immediately turning into a doting smile. "You're in luck, go in then," Mao Shuyu said to Ling Han, and then said to Zhang Chong, "Senior brother, I encountered a problem in my cultivation. Come with me and give me some advice." At first, Zhang Chong's heart was filled with displeasure, but when he heard Mao Shuyu's words, this sliver of displeasure immediately vanished without a trace. "What problem?" Ling Han smiled. He could tell that not only Zhang Chong liked Mao Shuyu, even Mao Shuyu was filled with affection towards this senior brother of hers, just that this girl was a little slow in the matters of love, and had not realized it at all. He entered into the courtyard, and there was a twisting and bending water gallery. A large lake rippled with light, and there was a mountain in the distance, enshrouded in mist, looking like it was a paradise. Further away, a man was presently sitting and fishing as he sipped tea, appearing to be incredibly relaxed. Ling Han walked over, and arrived behind that man. With clasped hands he greeted, "Ling Han greets Senior." And this was Mao Dai. It was merely a rear view, and he was like a mountain that could not be moved. Anyone could only look up at him in his presence. This was a third Severance elite. He really was close to merging with the heavenly Tao, and was indescribably strong. Mao Dai did not make a sound. After a long while, he raised his fishing rod, and a massive water snake had been tugged out of the water surface, but Ling Han shockingly saw that the water snake had horns and legs. This was no snake, but rather a dragon. A true dragon could be ranked as one of the strongest divine beasts in the ancient realm, but was really more or less a water snake in front of this elite. It was easily hooked up by him. He removed it from the fishing hook, and casually tossed it back into the giant lake. He smilingly said, "You mischievous little guy, just how much fishing bait of mine have you eaten knowing that I would not wound you?" The true dragon flipped out of the water surface, creating splashes, as if responding to him. Immediately, it then sank back into the water, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. This was a true dragon, but it really was very small. In the ancient realm, a true dragon would only have to grow naturally, and it was a natural Genesis tier, but in the celestial realm, this overall level had increased further. It was already a Genesis tier even when it was only an immature dragon, and if it matured, it was possible that it could be severing mundane tier, or even stronger than that. The problem was that this was not something that could be resolved with mere bloodline. It would have to go to a specific place in the celestial realm to sever its mortal bonds. Additionally, it was the same for when it advanced into the dividing soul tier, immortal palace tier, and so on. It could only break through at a specific location in the celestial realm. Only then did Mao Dai turn around. Instantly, it was like the whole universe had descended. What Ling Han saw was definitely not a single person, but rather the Tao of heaven and earth. It was only an instant, and this feeling vanished. Mao Dai stood, his arms crossed behind his back. His black robes fluttered. He was not tall, and was more on the leaner side, giving off a scholarly vibe. "Young man, you are very extraordinary," Mao Dai said. Chapter 1687. What is severing mundane tear? You are very extraordinary. This was not a compliment from just anyone, but the assessment of a third severance elite. Ling Han was neither haughty nor humble and said, "Senior is flattering me." Mao Dai smiled and replied, "There is no need to be modest. Being overly modest is equivalent to being proud." Ling Han smiled as well and responded, "This junior is indeed very extraordinary. I have not encountered anyone that can match me among my peers yet." Mao Dai couldn't help but be surprised, then laughed loudly and said, "Ha ha ha, you are quite interesting, very interesting." He paused and then continued, "So far, there was only one youth who could speak so frankly and with such confidence before me. That is because senior is amiable, so this junior dares to be frank," Ling Han said. Mao Dai extended a finger to tap at Ling Han. "This flattery is quite good. It is pleasing to me." He walked, his arms still crossed behind him, and said, "Come and walk with me." Ling Han set out behind him. Naturally, it was impossible that he would walk side by side with Mao Dai. Instead, he followed a small step behind him. "You only broke through to the Genesis tier after reaching 10 million stars, right?" Mao Dai asked suddenly. Ling Han hesitated slightly and replied, "Yes." Mao Dai had already shown him benevolence. Furthermore, it was very unwise to play any kind of tricks in such an elite. Mao Dai's figure paused slightly, and then immediately went back to normal. He said, "I never thought that I, Mao Dai, would have been able to meet a prodigy that had genuinely cultivated to the pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier. Young man, I take back my previous assessment. You are not very extraordinary, but rather extremely extraordinary." This assessment was really very high, extraordinary and outstanding. Ling Han only smiled in response. Since Mao Dai already told him not to be modest, he would not be reserved. He was indeed very awesome. In a battle of equals, only the male and female saints that had come out of major sects could be a match for him, the kind like Hunyo. "Young man, do you know what is severing mundane?" Mao Dai suddenly changed the topic. Severing mundane? Wasn't it severing one's mortal bonds? Ling Han pondered for a moment and then said, "That is dealing a strike to oneself, to sever one's most precious and valuable relations." Mao Dai nodded and then continued, "Heavenly Tao is cold and merciless. If one wants to attain immortality, one must pay a price. In the past, what I most valued was my wife and daughter, but after dealing 3 strikes to myself, no matter how earnestly I try to remember now, I cannot regain those previous emotions that I had once held towards my wife and daughter." This was sorrowful. It was clear that his love had once been so deep, but now he could not even remember that previous emotion that he had once felt, because he had already severed this relation himself, and nothing was left of it. Now Ling Han could slightly understand why Zhang Wushang would rather give up any hope of achieving revenge than to break through to the severing mundane tier. That was because from a certain aspect, after severing the mundane, he would no longer be who he had once been. "This is my eternal regret, and I will never be able to compensate for it." Mao Dai sighed, then turned to look at Ling Han and said, "Young man, is there anything that you value and are unwilling to part with?" "Yes." Ling Han nodded without hesitation. There had to be some other way that he could sever some relations that he did not value that much with this strike. Mao Dai looked at Ling Han and then slowly said, "Some people do not wish to sever what they value the most, and deliberately did some tricks to their memory, turning themselves into another person, and fall in love with another, wanting to use this relation as replacement when they step into the severing mundane tier. However, in front of the Tao of heaven and earth, cultivators have to face their true selves. No matter what kind of schemes you resort to, it is all pointless effort. To break through to the severing mundane tier, it is necessary to sever the mortal bond that binds you the most." Ling Han's figure involuntarily trembled. There were too many people that he valued, and all of them were memories that he was unwilling to sever. Mao Dai saw Ling Han's expression become grim, smiled and said, "Mortals all think that the severing mundane tier means dealing a blow to oneself, yet do not know that there is another path of severing mundane that the blow is not dealt to himself." Ling Han immediately became excited and said, "Senior, please guide me." He bowed fully. If there was a way for him to advance into the severing mundane tier without striking himself, then these words from Mao Dai today would be more valuable than a celestial king technique. Mao Dai smiled gladly and said, striking oneself is only a minor Dao, and the true path of strength would be striking the heaven and earth. Striking heaven and earth. Ling Han's mouth gaped slightly. Severing mundane meant severing one's mortal bonds, and merging with the Tao of heaven and earth. But if he turned around and struck heaven and earth, how was he going to merge with the Tao of heaven and earth? It was more likely that he would be rejected. Mao Dai explained, striking the heaven and earth, this was something that I saw in an ancient site. Years ago, there was a supreme prodigy that became a severing mundane tier by striking the heaven and earth, and did not borrow any power from the heaven and earth. All he depended on was his own strength. I myself am the heaven, and I myself am the earth, and what I say is fact. Hearing the last few words, Ling Han couldn't help but feel fired up. This was the path of strength that he had been pursuing all this while. But striking oneself is already very difficult. What more dealing a strike to the heaven and earth? Mao Dai's expression became serious. Furthermore, dealing a strike to the heaven and earth means that you would definitely experience a backlash from the heaven and earth. Even if you successfully dealt out this strike, the chances of your death would be extremely high. Ling Han's expression was determined, and he answered, Senior, thank you for showing me the right path. I still feel that I can try out this alternative path. Mao Dai nodded and said, You are a true prodigy. I am unwilling to have you experience the same regrets that I have, and at the same time wish that you can surpass me and become stronger. Breaking through to the Genesis tier at the pinnacle of Eternal River tier, and becoming a severing mundane tier, you would only be invincible among your peers at most. This so-called peers is referring to the first severance against the first severance, second severance against second severance. However, if you can advance into the severing mundane tier on this basis, then you will be invincible even in a tier-surpassing battle. This was unimaginable. Having just advanced into the first severance, he would be able to kill even a peak stage second severance elite. But just how many people were capable of this in the celestial realm? Merely the pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier had trapped who knew how many people, and added with the fact that one would have to strike the heaven and earth. Even if he managed to successfully deal this strike, most people would not be able to survive the backlash from the heaven and earth. Only a true king tier could accomplish this kind of glorious feat. As far as I know, there are a total of 7 mystery realms that one can advance into the severing mundane tier near Dark Moon City, and the mortality barrier pool is the location that would open the soonest. It is also where the power of heaven and earth is strongest, and going by my calculations, it should be enough to support you to strike at the heaven and earth. However, the mortality barrier pool will open 2 years later, and this bit of time is far from enough to allow you to reach the peak stage of Saint King tier, and accumulate enough comprehension at the same time. And the next time the mortality barrier pool opens would be 10 million years later. Mao Dai shook his head, appearing to feel that it was a pity. To deal a strike to the heaven and earth would require a stronger power from the heaven and earth, and only the mortality barrier pool suited their requirements, but this little bit of time was really not enough. However, after you reach the peak stage of Saint King tier, you can travel around. The celestial realm is too big, and there must be a mystery realm for severing mundane tier that can compare to the mortality barrier pool. Ling Han thanked him again. This information might only have been nonsense to others. Even if they knew that there was a way to avoid striking themselves, so what? It was impossible that they could manage to deal a strike to the heaven and earth. But for Ling Han, this was too valuable, and had resolved a huge problem that he had been constantly worrying about. Go on. Mao Dai waved him off, and after a pause, he added, If you have any kind of trouble, you can come look for me. It was clear how high an opinion he had of Ling Han from these words. Ling Han bowed and thanked him. However, though Mao Dai had already said such, Ling Han was definitely not the type to come and trouble him at every sign of a problem. You really thought that he had nothing else to do? This could only be used at the most crucial moment. Chapter 1688. Representative. Ling Han returned, and when he related these words from Mao Dai to the Empress, she was immediately incredibly overjoyed. What she valued the most was naturally her relationship with Ling Han, and that was something that she could not possibly sever, and this filled her with resolve to rather never advance into the severing mundane tier, and be in love with Ling Han until the end of her life. However, in an unexpected turn of events, there was actually an alternative. Striking the heaven and earth was definitely more difficult than dealing a strike to oneself, and the difficulty level was possibly not just a little bit harder, but rather 10 times to over 100 times higher, but she would be able to preserve the emotion she had for Ling Han, and would also be capable of surpassing any ordinary severing mundane tier in terms of battle prowess. To the incredibly proud Empress, this was her only choice, and was also the best choice for her. Without Ding Hu there, Ling Han's days naturally became considerably better than before, but there were also many people that were very cautious, and still maintained a distance from Ling Han who knew they might have to join the White Tiger Army in future, right? Their training continued, but only 5 days later, Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, and the others were all gathered. Aside from Ding Xiaochen, who was not a captain, the other 9 were all captains. Long Gaofei was seated, and he cast his eye on the gathered 10, and said, I have gathered you today to inform you that you all will be participating in a tournament, and your opponent will be a team from the Azure Dragon Army, White Tiger Army, and Vermilion Bird Army. Tu Kong. He paused and looked to his side. You will be in charge of explaining the subsequent details. Yes, sir. Tu Kong agreed respectfully first, and only then did he begin his explanation. As it turned out, there were a total of 237 one-star cities under the jurisdiction of the Black Moon sect, and every few hundred or thousand years or so, they could have these forces under their reign form a team of 10 members to participate in a tournament in Black Moon City, and this was only limited to the Genesis tier. This was the so-called chance for entering into the Dark Moon Army, and if one could rise above the others and gain the recognition of some higher-up of the Black Moon sect, they would have a chance of staying in a 2-star city. In future, it was possible that they might even have a chance of going to a 3-star city and gain the notice of the Fu clan. However, it would usually be 3 teams of official troops battling directly. After drawing lots, one of the teams would be skipped over, while the 2 teams that had been drawn would battle first, and the victor would be fighting the team that had been passed over. This final victor would then be able to represent Dark Moon City and participate in the tournament. This time, for the sake of fairness, they decided to add another team, but it was very obvious that if any of the 3 teams of official troops drew Ling Han and his group, they clearly had a massive advantage on their side. Would the official troops be unable to defeat the reserve troops? Ling Han naturally would not think that. Perhaps there were prodigies among prodigies in the official troops, but what would they be worth against him? Too bad. The Empress could not participate. This time, they only chose the captains of the 10 teams. Then why could Ding Xiaochen be here? The captain of his team claimed to be unwell, so Ding Xiaochen managed to replace him. Claiming to be unwell? It must have only been the Ding clan using threats and rewards to compel that person to give up his place. On the other hand, if one wanted to perfectly fuse 2 pieces of level 20 godly metal together, the price that had to be paid was huge, and it needed a severing mundane tier elite to temper it for a very long time. Moreover, it was not every severing mundane ancestor that could do it. He had to have extremely high accomplishments in the art of blacksmithing, and this ensured that any 1-star pseudo-divine metal was an incredibly valuable item. Putting aside others, even Ding Xiaochen felt greed that could not be restrained. If he could obtain a pseudo-celestial tool while he was in the Genesis tier, just how awesome would that be? He had self-awareness. It was possible that he could only advance into the severing mundane tier after more than 100 million years. Thus, the temptation of a pseudo-celestial tool was naturally massive. Otherwise, he would have to wait until he had advanced into the severing mundane tier to be bestowed with a pseudo-celestial tool by his clan. But there was a realistic problem. How were they supposed to compete with the official troops? The latter had cultivated innumerable more years than them, and were very cohesive and coordinated at that, so they were able to fully unleash the maximum battle prowess of all their members, or even higher than that. And them. It had just been a few days, so what kind of cooperation could they have managed to nurture? Furthermore, out of those that could rise above the others in the official troops, which one of them wasn't an invincible elite even among Genesis tiers? There was no end to the Genesis tier, and it was only needed to form a total of 10 billion stars, and that would mean that they had accumulated enough origin power. If their comprehension of the cultivation level was also enough, they could attempt to break through to the severing mundane tier. Thus, power was absolutely the limit before breaking through to 10 billion stars, and it was still a considerable advantage to have a few more million or billion years to cultivate. Of course, after 10 billion stars, it would be increasingly harder to form new stars. Just like how every step forward was incredibly difficult after an eternal river tier had formed 1 million stars. Only a prodigy would be able to continue their triumphant progress. The gap in power and the gap in cooperation. Did they even have any hopes of emerging victorious? Even Ding Xiaochen and Mao Shuyu were shaking their heads. They were only going to be accompanying the victors, and there was no need for them to consider the possibility of winning at all. After returning to make some preparations, they set out on their journey, heading to the camp of the Dark Moon Army. Though they were only characters to accompany the victors, the other three teams were not, so it was natural that the members had to be chosen wisely. They were going to represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, and the three great clans were also very serious, wanting to get the highest possible accomplishment. From a certain aspect, this was also a display of strength of a major city, and was extremely important. The tournament would be held 3 days later, and taking advantage of these 3 days, Ling Han's team of reserve troops would also be making some last-minute preparations. Before the battles began, they still had to have a slight bit of hope that they could win. But it was only a mere 3 days. How could it possibly help them to achieve full-fledged cooperation? Putting aside other issues, merely with the conflict between Ling Han and Ding Xiaochen, it was impossible for them to achieve any kind of cooperation. 3 days later, they entered into the battlegrounds with expressions of disappointment. They could only think of this as mere procedure. The 4 teams drew lots to decide their respective opponents. Ling Han and his group were represented by Tu Kong, and the final result was that the Azure Dragon Army would face the Vermilion Bird Army, and the White Tiger Army would face the reserve troops. Seeing this kind of result, the Ding Clan and the White Tiger Army all smiled. This was equivalent to them having already achieved victory. Unless the Azure Dragon Army and the Vermilion Bird Army reached some kind of agreement, if they really put everything on the line, whichever team won could only possibly be a narrow victory, and if they fought the White Tiger Army next, it was natural that they would lose. This kind of tournament could not possibly alert any powerful figures, but 3 vice-commanders had still appeared, and the severing mundane tier elite of the Ding clan was Ding Hu. When his eyes swept over Ling Han, a flash of killing intent flickered. A mighty severing mundane ancestor actually couldn't do anything to a mere great saint. Humph, if he did not kill this boy, what face would he have left? Begin. The 4 teams came on at the same time. There were 10 people in each team, and the rules were very simple. It would be a battle royale, right until all the members of one side collapsed. Let's admit defeat, Ding Xiaochen said immediately. Since their opponent was a team from his own clan, he naturally hoped that the White Tiger Army could have as easy a victory as possible. Chapter 1689. Cheering on. Just when these words had left Ding Xiaochen's mouth, he was immediately on the receiving end of disdain from his companions. Was there any other person like him? He was practically a traitor. Actually, Ding Xiaochen bore a heavy responsibility for deliberately joining this team of reserve troops that could not possibly win. If they had drawn the White Tiger Army as their opponent, Ding Xiaochen would advise the others to give up the idea of battle to save some effort for the White Tiger Army. But if they had not drawn the White Tiger Army, then he had to attempt to drive up everyone's morale at all costs, and create as much trouble for their opponent as possible so that the White Tiger Army would have increased chances of victory. Though they were destined to lose, they were still outstanding characters that had been picked from among the reserve troops, and would be sufficient to create some trouble for the official troops. Ling Han glanced disdainfully at Ding Xiaochen. If you don't want to fight, then scram. Don't be a hindrance here and affect team morale. If this had been the battleground, I would have directly removed your head. Ding Xiaochen directed a glare at Ling Han, yet did not talk back. He had suffered at Ling Han's hands once before, and knew that this guy did not only have the strength to suppress him, but would also dare to do so he naturally would not seek his own suffering. He ignored Ling Han and said to the others, I am saying this for your own good. Injuries are inevitable if we go up and fight. In any case, we will definitely lose, so why should we make things difficult for ourselves? I have some starstones here, so does everyone have any interest? This was equivalent to public bribery. Hearing these words from him, a few captains were immediately swayed, but there were also some that were unmoved. For example, Mao Shuyu was almost close to becoming mad with fury, and Wei Bo, Qin Hanyu, and Luo Xinyang were all unmoved. It was unknown whether they thought a few starstones was too paltry a sum, or they were really that upright. Scram! Ling Han said eloquently. With a soft exclamation, Ding Xiaochun's face instantly turned pale, and blood was seeping out of all his apertures. Trash from the reserve troops, will you surrender on your own volition, or would rather we give you a harsh thrashing? The 10 people from the White Tiger Army all surrounded them. They were the outstanding figures of this army, and any one of them had been a peak stage Saint King for innumerable years. The number of stars they had formed was unimaginably numerous. One of them looked at Ding Xiaochun and asked, "Xiaochun, are you all right?" 27th uncle, I am fine. Ding Xiaochun rubbed his face. Though he said he was fine, the hint of shock in his expression was hard to conceal. Blood was actually spilling from his 7 apertures with just a soft rebuke from Ling Han. Just how wide was the gap between the two of them? At first, he thought that he could make up for this gap if he put in more effort, but from the look of things now, the gap between them was like the gap between 2 stars in the skies, and was absolutely unbridgeable. The person that Ding Xiaochun had addressed as 27th uncle was naturally also a member of the Ding clan. His name was Ding Sun, and he had already formed more than 20 billion stars. Though his comprehension of cultivation level was still at the peak stage of Saint King tier, his power was overwhelming. His talent in cultivation was actually not as high as Ding Xiaochun's. It was just that he had been born a few 100 million years earlier, and that was why his battle prowess surpassed the latter's. Ding Xiaochun was a descendant that the clan had focused on nurturing, and was the most likely person in the Ding clan to become a severing mundane ancestor, so he definitely could not meet the slightest mishap. That young man was really brazen to actually dare to harm Ding Xiaochun. Beat them as much as possible, Ding Sun declared coldly. Since the White Tiger Army was under the Ding clan's jurisdiction, he naturally was the leader of this team, though his battle prowess might not be the strongest among them. The others naturally would not defy him. Their original plans had to be abandoned. This young man was worth them paying a higher price to pull him in under their banner. Ho ho, the Ding clan was really funny. They were actually unwilling to pull in such a young king tier into their ranks, and instead were proactively pushing him onto their opposing side. This was practically idiotic. This was good too. Precisely because there were idiots like the Ding clan, they would have one less opponent when they competed over Ling Han in future. However, they would still have to prevent the Ding clan from harming him. After all, Genesis tier was too fragile, and if a severing mundane tier wanted to make a move on him, then there really were 10,000 ways that he could achieve this goal. In the battlegrounds, the 10 members of the White Tiger team all received a terrible shock by Ling Han's frightening strength. Was this really a rookie soldier? Some of them had previously represented Dark Moon City to participate in the tournament at Black Moon City before, and they could only imagine that perhaps only the young prodigies of the Black Moon sect could possibly have such battle prowess. Ding Sun's eyes were poisonous, and he signaled at Ding Xiaochun. The latter immediately nodded. Chapter 1690. The Plot of a Vile Character. Ding Xiaochun had a second mission. If he was unable to convince the others, he would take the job of a planted agent and stab the others in the back. I was your teammate, so would you keep your guard up against me? Ding Xiaochun stared at Ling Han's back, his eyes menacing. This man caused him utter humiliation, and had to be gotten rid of. Otherwise, he would become a thorn in his heart, and that was going to be fatal when he broke through to the severing mundane tier. Not only would it affect his breakthrough, it could even cause him to be wounded by the Great Tao. Breaking through was an incredibly dangerous thing in the first place, so how could he survive it if his Tao heart was not stable? Now that everyone was battling fiercely, how could Ling Han have possibly imagined that his teammate would turn around and attack him? Oh, he would get his revenge later. Sorry, this was a battle royale, and we hadn't broken in our cooperation for many days, so wouldn't it be a very normal thing to happen if our cooperation didn't work that well? Worst came to worst, he would just have to get some punishment, but that was fine. With the interference of the Ding clan, the matter would definitely be turned into a small problem, and a small problem was no problem at all. He hadn't done it on purpose after all, right? Ding Xiaochun summoned the green wooden saber, and as a murderous aura surged, the image of a man-eating tree appeared. This was a spiritual body, but its might was not weak in the slightest. He activated it to the fullest, and when the might of the divine saber had been maximized, he suddenly struck, delivering a slash at a member of the White Tiger team. That person understood his intentions, and immediately jumped towards Ling Han. In this way, this strike from Ding Xiaochen would be openly directed at Ling Han's back. When the saber light was about to reach Ling Han, only then did Ding Xiaochen loudly call out, "Watch out! Watch out your sister!" Seeing this scene, the Vermilion Bird Army and Azure Dragon Army around them almost hurled out curses. "Your acting is really too fake, isn't it? This strike is clearly heading for Ling Han directly, and you actually pretend to call out, 'Watch out.'" They were really treating others like fools. With that little bit of distance, how was Ling Han supposed to dodge? Nobody saw that a cold smirk turned up the corners of Ling Han's lips. He had already expected that Ding Xiaochen would betray them. Otherwise, why would Ding Xiaochen have insisted on joining them when participating in this kind of tournament did not have the slightest benefit, and they would only be defeated terribly? However, with how strong Ling Han's present abilities were, even if he had not anticipated it in advance, it was still all right. Don't assume that he was fighting against 7 people all on his own, and bore the majority of the firepower of the White Tiger team with difficulty. In truth, he was still very much at ease, and had not completely displayed his full battle prowess yet. A saber strike slashed over, and the blade of the saber had yet to reach him when that tree spirit first entwined around Ling Han, wanting to devour his body and spirit. If Ling Han's spirit had been possessed, he would definitely be incapable of avoiding the upcoming strike. This was a top-grade god tool. What Saint King would be able to hold up against it? You had used your bare fists to shatter god tools, and that possibly had been that you had channeled some kind of cultivation technique to protect your fist, but if your spirit was possessed, how would you be able to channel any kind of cultivation technique? A vengeful smile appeared on Ding Xiaochen's lips. With this strike, even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded. The strike had arrived. Ling Han suddenly turned around. Clang, he stretched out his hand, and took hold of the green wooden saber. A mocking smirk appeared on his lips, and he suddenly gave a shove. Ka-ka-ka. The sound of bones shattering rang out, and Ding Xiaochen's 2 arms and the bones in them had all been shattered forcefully, completely unable to resist the powerful strength that Ling Han had exerted. At this instant, Ding Xiaochen's expression was very expressive. Not only was his face filled with agony, it was also covered with shock. In his eyes, this was something that should not have happened. Ling Han wasn't defeated even like this. Pooh! The green wooden saber crashed backwards, the blunt hilt slammed onto his chest, and the sound of bones breaking rang out once more. The defense of the skin of a Saint King was rendered completely useless, and the saber's hilt directly penetrated his flesh and blood into his chest, creating a massive bloody hole. A vicious glint flashed in Ling Han's eyes, yet he did not follow it up with another strike. He calmly asked, "If you hurt others, it will eventually come back to you. Aren't you worried that if you do too many shameful deeds, ghosts will come knocking at your door at midnight?" Pa, Ding Xiaochen flopped onto the ground, his head covered with cold sweat and face as pale as paper. Hi's heart had been burst by the green wooden saber, and large amounts of divine blood were gushing out. This caused tremendous damage to his life force, and directly affected his time of breaking through to the severing mundane tier. But if Ling Han had followed up with another punch, he presently would not have just been injured, but rather would have died. "How dare you, murderer!" Ding Hu immediately leaped to his feet, and was about to make a move to attack Ling Han. "Brother Ding Hu, what need is there to be angry?" The severing mundane tier from the Long clan, Long Chengren, asked calmly, but his palm had already stretched out, closing off the path of Ding Hu's move. The severing mundane ancestor from the Duan clan, Duan Wen, also stood up. He crossed his arms over his chest with a smile, and said, "This is a competition, so death and injury is inevitable. Furthermore, this is only a minor injury." Minor injury? Even his heart had been burst, and this was still a minor injury? What did the heart mean for a cultivator? It was the place where blood essence was stored, and that was why there was something called heart's blood. And now that his heart had burst, his blood essence would definitely have emptied out completely, which would also cause severe damage to his life force. Ding Hu's expression was livid, but with 2 great severing mundane ancestors clearly expressing that they would make trouble for him if he dared to move, he had no choice but to suppress his fury. If there was only one, he would not be afraid, but with 2 severing mundane tears, ho-ho. He sat back down heavily, lowering his eyes. Those were capable of murder. If he swept his eyes over any Genesis tier, they would only be rent into pieces. The others had also broken out in a commotion. They had not thought that there would be such a dramatic turn of events. They all thought that even if Ling Han did not die, he would be severely wounded with this strike, but it was only a blink of an eye, and the one who was heavily injured had turned into Ding Xiaochen. If you're injured, then obediently rest on the sidelines. Ling Han shot out a kick. Pang! Ding Xiaochen was immediately kicked out. He had turned into a ball, and rolled over a dozen times before finally stopping. Ding Xiaochen was really pitiful. He had been heavily injured in the first place, and with another blow like this, he was angry, humiliated, and pained all at the same time. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and directly passed out. Ling Han looked towards the 10 members of the White Tiger team that were already dumbfounded, broke into a grin, and asked, "Why are you all being so nice? Not fighting anymore? Being nice your sister. Who wants to be nice to you? We were all scared by you, all right? Are you fuck really a Saint King? Are you fuck really a rookie soldier? Why do you seem to be a few hundred times stronger than even veteran soldiers?" Taking advantage of this opening when they were all dumbfounded, Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others took the chance to attack. Pang pang pang. They instantly defeated 3 of them, and the remaining 7 had lost their courage completely. As long as Ling Han was still standing there, who could match him? The White Tiger team admitted defeat. At first, the conclusion of this battle was assumed to be completely assured, and it was going to be absolutely one-sided. In truth, it had indeed been completely assured, and was absolutely one-sided, but the position of victor and loser were exchanged. The reserve troops had actually defeated the official troops. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ling Han. It was this man that had single-handedly created this miracle. Ding, whose expression was dark, and his hands were balled tightly into fists. One could see there were veins popping on his forehead, and grinding sounds could be heard from his knuckles because of how tightly his hands were clenched. At this moment, his killing intent towards Ling Han had surged to the top. "We won!" Mao Shuyu immediately cheered. Among the few of them, it was her personality that was the most hot-tempered and vibrant, unlike the composed Wei Bo and the others. However, this was an unexpected victory, and even Wei Bo and the others broke into slight smiles. The few team members that had wanted to surrender even before fighting all bore expressions of embarrassment, but they could not hide their exuberant joy. As long as they had Ling Han's fierce power on their side, it was completely no issue for them to represent Dark Moon City in the upcoming tournament. Chapter 1691. Fighting Azure Dragon Team. As long as they could represent Dark Moon City in the tournament, they would be able to gain a reward of 100 starstones, and if they could get a high ranking, then they would get a further reward of a 1-star pseudo-divine medal. There was hope, there really was hope. Their battle with the White Tiger team had ended too quickly. At this moment, the Azure Dragon team and Vermilion Bird team were still battling fiercely. In fact, because the battle was too fierce and tight, they did not even know what had just happened. Perhaps some of them had glimpsed that the battle on this side had already ended, but wasn't that very normal? How could the reserve team be a match for the White Tiger team? Ling Han and his group descended and rested, waiting for the victor to emerge between the Azure Dragon team and the Vermilion Bird team. This was an evenly matched battle. Both sides were very strong, and Mao Shuyu and the others would occasionally gasp at their performance. That was how fierce the battle was. Yet Ling Han felt very bored. Aside from those whose strength was not too far from his, a battle of Saint King tiers was really completely insufficient to capture his interest. They battled straight through a whole day and night, and only then did this battle finally conclude. The victor was the Azure Dragon team. The reason the Azure Dragon team managed to emerge victorious was because they had a very strong captain, the prodigy of the Duan clan, Duan Jun. Unlike Ding Xiaochen, who had entered into the army just to court a woman, Duan Jun was a born fanatic of martial arts, and enjoyed battle. He had only joined the Dark Moon army for 300,000 years, but he had fought in no less than 3 million battles, both big and small. This was equivalent to going out to fight at least every month. This frequency was astonishingly high. Yet this was the path of cultivation that was the most suited for him. In a short 300,000 years, He had already completed the transformation from a rookie of the reserve troop to a captain of the Azure Dragon Army. He was known as the top elite of the Azure Dragon Army, and the most likely person in the Duan clan to break through to the Severing Mundane tier. His battle prowess was clearly superior to that of the others, but because this was a team battle, individual strength was not that important. Hence, the Azure Dragon team only managed to gain victory after going through a tough battle. He was like Ling Han, whose strength had exceeded the standards that a Saint King should have, and his individual strength was enough to overwhelm his whole team. When the Azure Dragon team found out that their next opponent was the reserve team, all of their expressions were brilliant. How was that possible? When they probed for the exact details of the battle circumstances, a strong vigilance against Ling Han naturally rose up in them. He turned the battle situation completely around with his individual strength. This was too frightening. After the Azure Dragon army rested for a while, the final battle immediately began. All the others are trash, we just have to defeat that brat called Ling Han, Duanjun said loudly. Though we are all weary, though our battle prowess is not at its prime, we just have to grit our teeth, and victory is right in front of us. Azure Dragon, victory for all battles. The other 9 team members all called out their slogan. Under the leadership of Duanjun, the 10 of them approached. Mao Shuyu and the others automatically stood behind Ling Han. Only Ding Xiaofan was unable to participate in the battle, because his injuries were too severe. They were only left with 9 of their members. Charge! The moment Duanjun had entered into battle mode, he became mad. His eyes were bloodshot, and his fighting spirit had solidified. He directly shot out, brandishing a massive battle axe in his hands, and directly delivering a strike right onto Ling Han. Behind him, his 9 teammates had all instilled their own power into Duanjun. This was a little like the power of the nation, but there was no so-called power of the nation in the celestial realm. Though a few Fourth Severance Grand Elders had appeared continuously in the history of the Ding clan, they all did not manage to cross over the step of dividing soul tier, and ultimately died in the Immortals' tribulation. In the celestial realm, time was still incredibly valuable. Even if you had an endless lifespan, if you could not ensure that your cultivation level continued to advance, you would ultimately be taken back by the heaven and earth. Mao Dai has a disciple that is quite interested in Mao Dai's little girl, Ding Yaolong said suddenly. Ancestor, what you mean is to think of a way to have Mao Dai's disciple and that girl from the Mao clan to become husband and wife? Ding Hu asked respectfully. In that manner, Ling Han could not possibly become Mao Dai's firm ally. Ding Yaolong smiled calmly and said, No, think of a way to have Ling Han and the little girl of Mao clan become a couple. Ah! All the higher-ups exchanged looks, feeling baffled. Weren't they afraid that Mao Dai would become allies with Ling Han? The 2 of them both had 3.5 stars aptitude, and if they were allied they could be nature-defying. Pa, someone broke out in applause and laughed out loud. Smart, this is really smart. This move from Ancestor is really incredibly smart. All the higher-ups turned to look at that person. You don't have to be so gross in how you're sucking up to Ancestor, right? That person explained, the key is that the disciple of Mao Dai, Zhang Chong, right, likes that little girl of the Mao clan very much. If we could have Ling Han, that damn brat, defile the little girl of the Mao clan, just think, what would Zhang Chong do? Kill that brat, of course, someone immediately answered. Haha, then wouldn't this lead to internal strife between Mao Dai and Ling Han? Even if Mao Dai thought that what was done, and just made the best of things by marrying his daughter to Ling Han, would Zhang Chong be able to take this lying down? This guy could apparently advance into the Severing Mundane tier this time round, and by then, killing Ling Han would merely be a piece of cake for him. He. These higher-ups all laughed. This was what was called killing 2 birds with 1 stone. As for how much hurt Mao Shuyu would endure in this matter, how could that be any consideration of these people? In their eyes, there was only profit. For the sake of profit, they could even sacrifice their own clansmen. What more when it was an outsider? Then we will execute this plan after Zhang Chong advances into the Severing Mundane tier to ensure that there will be no mistakes. With Ling Han's strong insistence, the Empress went with him, heading to Black Moon City. How could he not bring her along with him? By now, Ling Han was completely hostile with the Ding clan, and if he left, what if the Ding clan harmed the Empress? In front of a severing mundane ancestor, no matter how much a prodigy the Empress was, she would not have any ability to resist. Ling Han did not want anything that would cause him eternal regret to happen. Even if the Empress had to become a military deserter, he would bring her with him inside the Black Tower. Thankfully, the great commander of the Dark Moon Army was Mao Dai. Though he was merely a figurehead, he still had that little bit of power. Duan Jun had indeed pulled Ling Han along with him to have wine, and even invited more than a dozen delicate beauties who were also very unreserved from a few minor clans of the city. When they saw Ling Han and Duan Jun, they would call them Brother Jun and Brother Han, looking like they were ready to accept their advances as long as they were willing. Duan Jun set himself free completely, having a woman on either side of him, and taking full advantage of them. However, he did not go too far, and did not overdo things with these women, which made these delicate misses all feel very resentful. Ling Han was even more direct. He was cold and kept all of them at a very far distance. To be honest, even if he was the lascivious type, with such an exquisite beauty like the Empress, would he still be attracted by such mediocre beauties? Duan Jun was quite a likable person. He was incredibly outspoken, and not the type to beat around the bush with his words. This was very suited to Ling Han's tastes. If it stood upright, then it would be a majestic mountain, but in this great lake that was akin to an ocean, this was not the slightest bit eye-catching. The waves swept towards them, and the body of the ship swayed strongly. Even Ling Han's expression shifted slightly at that feeling of power. This was definitely something that could threaten his godly bones. Chapter 1693. Black Moon City. The waves crashed into the ship's body, and it would cause the ship to sway wildly every time. Even if Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others were all at the consummate level of the Genesis tier, they still felt an uncomfortable feeling of dizziness and wanting to vomit. Ling Han and the Empress were still fine. Once they locked their doors, they could hide in the Black Tower, so who cared about the waves? The person who lived a secluded life was Ding Xiaofan. Not only had he lost to Ling Han successively, he had even publicly undermined him, so what face would he have left to face the others? However, he was really thick-skinned. He still came brazenly because this was also an opportunity for him. Black Moon City, a 2-star city. Don't think that there was only a gap of 1 level between 1 star and 2 stars. There was also just a gap of 1 level between the Celestial King tier and Ascending Origin tier, but just how massive was the gulf between the two cultivation levels exactly? What if he encountered a dividing soul tier elite in Black Moon City and gained his favor, with the latter wanting to take him in as a son-in-law or disciple? Then, wouldn't he achieve meteoric success? In theory, he could only achieve the 3rd severance at most, but if a dividing soul tier elite was willing to provide his valuable assistance, then the possibility of him achieving the 4th severance was extremely high. The gap of 1 severance was possibly the difference of 10 billion years of lifespan and being able to survive the Immortal's tribulation a few more times. Thus, even if Ding Xiaofan had to endure disdain from all the others, he would not give up this chance. The ship traveled very quickly, almost matching the speed of a full-out sprint from Ling Han. If it did not anchor midway, it would only need about a month's time to reach Black Moon City. However, this large ship was not for the sole purpose of sending Ling Han and his group. It also had the task of transporting cargo. Every time they arrived at the next city, a large amount of cargo would be unloaded from the ship, and a large amount of cargo would also be loaded onto the ship. Then they would proceed to the next city. With such delays, the journey would have to take about 2 months' time. Ling Han sat underneath the reincarnation tree, continuing to comprehend regulations. In the celestial realm, the spiritual qi was incredibly dense. It could at least ensure that a cultivator's rate of advancement would be maintained at an astonishingly high speed before celestial level. Of course, the prerequisite was that his comprehension of regulations would have to follow through. Otherwise, no matter how beneficial the environment for cultivation was, it would be pointless. And with the help of the reincarnation tree, it was equivalent to bestowing a pair of wings to Ling Han that would allow him to soar. He had just entered into the celestial realm for these few days, and he had already reached the peak stage of the Great Saint tier. He only had to accumulate some more origin power, settle his appreciation, and he would be able to break through to the Saint King tier. By then, he was sure that even if it was a male or female saint from the major sects, as long as they were in the same cultivation level, he would still be able to suppress them easily. He was still drinking the heavenly tribulation fluid and comprehending the lightning element regulations, turning it into his own mystical power. Of course, he also left some for the Empress and the others. Because of physique, the others would only be able to consume it after entering into the severing mundane tier. Furthermore, Ling Han only planned to give it to the Empress and the Rain Emperor. That was because their natural talent at cultivation was outstanding. If it was given to the others, that would really be biting off more than they could chew. It would instead hinder their cultivation level, and that would be too much of a waste. Ling Han deepened his comprehension of extermination lightning, and the power of destruction was becoming more and more terrifying. However, lightning flash was not improved further. Instead, he had an additional mystical power, and Ling Han called it cracking light sphere. He could throw out a sphere of lightning, and then control its explosion as he willed, producing a frightening destructive power. It could impact all the targets around him, but could not differentiate between allies and enemies, because this was an attack that had already been launched. However, if he was to use this technique, he would need to accumulate lightning regulations from around him, and the more time he spent on accumulation, the greater its power would be, but it could not surpass a certain upper limit, or it would explode before he managed to throw it out. The Empress's advancement was even faster than his, but she was still slightly stalled by the barrier of cultivation level of the Saint King tier. She probably would break through before he did, but it would not be too many days earlier. 2 months later, the ship safely arrived at Black Moon City. Ling Han stood at the bow of the ship, and looked at the large city that had suddenly appeared in front of them. He couldn't help but be stunned, because this large city was floating in midair. No matter how he looked at it, it was a great star, and there were also multiple smaller stars orbiting around it, but upon closer look, those were not small stars, but rather multiple gigantic meteors. Like floating islands, there were tall structures erected on every meteor, and presented a grand sight. Black Moon City was above, and there was also another city on ground level that was astonishingly huge. It could match Dark Moon City in size, but compared with Black Moon City, it was pitifully small. This was the secondary city of Black Moon City. Usually, all traveling merchants and visitors would have to first undergo application for entry in this secondary city, and after their application was approved, there would be a specialized path to the main city. To directly fly up without permission? Then just wait to be blasted into smithereens. Entering the secondary city did not involve that many rules. One only had to pay for his accommodations and meals, or any other expenses. This payment was not made in gold and silver, but rather star stones. They first found an inn to stay in. Even if they were representing Dark Moon City in the tournament, they still had to write a report to apply for entry into the city, which would go through multiple levels of approval. It would take about 10 days or so to be approved. Since they were already here, they might as well take a walk around. Though this was just a secondary city, the grade of food and entertainment here were several levels higher than in Dark Moon City. For example, as long as you could pay, you would be able to even consume the meat of immortal beasts. Ling Han very much wanted to try immortal beast meat, but when he found out the price, he gave up the idea. 20,000 star stones for a single plate, and there were only 7 or 8 pieces of meat which were not that much thicker than a piece of paper on the plate. It was said that consuming immortal beast meat could greatly increase the accumulation of origin power, and even let one obtain celestial-level shards of great Tao to assist in the appreciation of regulations. This really was a good thing, but the price was also overwhelmingly high. How many people could really afford a meal like that? Even a first Severance Grand Elder like Long Gaofei would only get about 100 star stones every year without any extra income. He would have to wait a whole 200 years' time just to have a single serving of immortal beast meat. Forget it, he would just come eat when he had the funds in future. This woman has a very attractive figure. Just when Ling Han and the Empress planned to leave, they heard a voice filled with vulgarity ring out behind them. It came from a young man that looked to be only in his 20s. Take off the veil on your face and let me take a good look. I'll treat you to a meal of immortal beast meat. The Empress cast a glance at him, and waved her fingers. What she meant was, scram. I can't even be bothered to talk to you. Her slender hand was like soft grass, her fingers like green onions and incredibly tempting. That young man was already staring in infatuation, and couldn't help but stretch out his hand to touch the Empress's slender hand, and said, "Woman, let me touch your hand. I am extremely accurate in my technique of feeling bones." The Empress's slender brow wrinkled, and she pressed out a palm. Pong, a powerful force surged out, and that young man immediately rolled backwards like he was a ball. He overturned many walls before he finally stopped, and his limbs were all drooping by then. He had passed out. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Come, let's walk around someplace else." They did not take this matter to heart. As they saw it, this young man could not possibly be any rich and powerful descendant in Black Moon City. Otherwise, he would not have come to the secondary city. The highest possibility was that he had come with his seniors to participate in the major tournament of Black Moon City. Chapter 1694. Fierce and Uncivilized Siblings. Ling Han and the Empress walked around casually in the secondary city, finding out some information regarding Black Moon City. In truth, it was not easy to enter into a 2-star city and above. It was not something that could be done just by paying an entrance fee. Of course, the entrance fee into the city still had to be paid, but one would also need a special reason. For example, if you were a resident of the city, or if you had been invited. Want to enter into the city as you like? No way. Even traders could not possibly enter Black Moon City, and could only hand over their goods in the secondary city. It was rumored that the cultivation environment in Black Moon City was 10 times better than the Dark Moon cities. If they opened their doors wide, then even if Black Moon City was incredibly gigantic, it would definitely be flooded with people. However, this kind of restriction also had another purpose, and that was to show the lofty position of a 2-star city. If everyone could simply enter the Imperial Palace as they liked, then what prestige would be left? The celestial realm had immortal substance. As long as one entered the severing mundane tier, and managed to survive the immortal's tribulation repeatedly, they would theoretically possess an endless lifespan. And in truth, this was greatly beneficial to every single person. Because they were breathing in immortal substance constantly, it was preserved inside their bodies, and every person's lifespan would be greatly higher than that of the living beings of the ancient realm. Here, even a person who had never cultivated before could live 5 to 6 centuries, and Genesis tiers were even able to reach 5 or 6 billion years old. Black Moon City had a giant formation to gather the spiritual chi and immortal substance from the surroundings, and if one resided in the city for an extended period, their rate of advancement in cultivation would not only be swift, their lifespan would also be longer. Wasn't the reason why cultivators cultivated precisely to snatch more years of life from the heavens? These reasons added together made a 2-star city something that everyone would scramble madly for, and even a rich kid like Ding Xiaofan wanted to squeeze in at all costs. And this was only a 2-star city. So what about a 3-star city? A 4-star city? A 5-star city? After they had walked around enough, Ling Han and the Empress headed back to their inn. Yet they were only halfway there when an aggressive woman stood in their way. "So you were the ones who beat my brother?" This woman's killing intent was blazing. She was extremely enchanting in appearance, and could be considered a top beauty. Of course, she was no match for the Empress. "Sister, they were the ones who beat me." There was a badly battered young man standing beside her, pointing angrily at Ling Han and the Empress. It was the guy who had wanted to take liberties with the Empress previously, yet was sent flying with a single slap from her. This pair of siblings was quite interesting, speaking in concert with each other. The woman humphed and declared, "Each of you break your arm and kowtow to my brother in my apology, and I can spare your lives." "Sister, I want that woman." The young man pointed at the Empress. Though he had not seen the Empress's true features, just by looking at the Empress's captivating figure, his heart burned with fire, and he was determined to possess her. An indulgent expression flashed over the woman's face, and she nodded and replied, all right, whatever Bauer wants." She turned to look at Ling Han and the Empress again, and frowned. "What are you two waiting for?" Ling Han couldn't help but shake his head and asked, "Are the two of you retards?" "Retards are nothing to fear, but if you run around despite knowing the fact that you are retards, that would be your fault." "What a wicked mouth!" the woman rebuked, and delivered a slap towards Ling Han. In front of me, Lu Muyu. What right do you two have to be arrogant? Ling Han delivered a casual strike, and easily resolved this blow from Lu Muyu. He calmly said, without asking for reason, you are immediately finding fault, and even want to break our arms, and make us kowtow and apologize. How ridiculous. If this was merely being arrogant, then what when your brother wants to take my wife by force, and you actually agree? This has really refreshed my perception of people. He broke into a grin and said, I have decided to capture you and simply hand you over to any single man as his wife so you can also have a taste of that experience. Furthermore, it will also solve the life problem of a single man. How dare you? Lu Muyu sneered, and struck out another palm. This time, her attack was filled with anger, so her power was considerably greater than before. The force of her strike turned into a crescent blade that was entwined with regulations of great Tao. Multiple patterns dazzled the skies, and was very frightening. This woman was really reckless. Even if the structures in the celestial realm were sturdy, the full power attack of a Genesis tier would still cause massive damage. She did not care that this was a street in a busy marketplace at all, and attacked just because she wanted to. Ling Han's expression cooled. Using lightning flash, he had already suddenly appeared in front of Lu Muyu. He had delivered a slap. He did not feel that his anger was vented enough with just one slap, and threw another slap with the back of his hand. After these two slaps landed, Lu Muyu's exquisite face was instantly swollen, and her hair was disheveled. What beauty did she have left? All that was left was malevolence. She glared viciously at Ling Han, and a majestic light flickered in her hands. She had summoned a precious sword. This was really a previous sword. The sword's blade was covered densely with patterns of great Tao, as if it was the sword of an emperor, exuding an endless aura of dignity. Even Ling Han was slightly moved. This definitely was no ordinary Saint King tier weapon. Its power definitely surpassed that standard, but it seemed to still be very far from severing mundane tier. It seemed to have been tempered by a severing mundane ancestor, but had not truly ascended to the level of severing mundane tier. It should have been forged from half-star pseudo-divine metal, so even if there was a severing mundane ancestor involved, it was still unable to attain the level of the first severance. Die! Lu Muyu brandished the sword and struck at Ling Han. The sword chi was biting cold, like great Tao itself was in a rage. Multiple flashes of sword chi were all formed from patterns of great Tao. This destructive power was definitely terrifying. Ling Han did not dare be careless. He had not defended against this kind of precious tool before. Immediately, he clenched his hands into fists, and struck back at the sword chi. His present physique had also reached the extent of half-star pseudo-divine metal, so he did not fear a head-on clash like this. Boom! 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 The force of his punches clashed with the sword chi, and it would result in a blinding flash every time, as if the heavens and earth were being split apart. After only a few moves, Ling Han had free rein. If the power of this divine sword could be unleashed fully, then it would definitely be capable of contending against him. What was unfortunate was that a tool was only a tool, after all, so how could it be any match for a human? He advanced aggressively, and easily took this sword from his opponent's hands by force. He put it away casually, then sealed the opponent's cultivation level, and picked her up. The young man wanted to run, but Ling Han caught up with him in a single step, and similarly picked him up. After Lu Muyu herself had been captured, she still maintained her fierce manner, and was still making threatening gestures, but when she saw that the young man was captured, she had turned pale in fear, and shrilly screamed, "Let go of my brother! If you dare touch a single hair on his head, I will kill you! I swear, I will definitely kill you!" Ling Han shook his hand, and a series of cracks rang out. At least 1/3 of all the bones in Lu Bao's body had been shattered from the force. He looked at that young man again, and the latter turned pale in fear. He could not help but begin to shiver, and the seat of his pants was wet. He had actually peed himself in fear. "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" the young man wailed. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I am not a butcher, so I do not know how to kill pigs. But for someone who likes to humiliate women so much, I will let you have a taste of the same experience." When they had strolled around just now, He had seen a brothel that catered deliberately for men that had unique tastes. It was filled with gorgeously dressed men. As for Lu Muyu, just like how he had said previously, she would be sent to a single man. Chapter 1695. Stakes. After dealing with the Lu siblings, Ling Han was in a good mood, and returned to the inn with the Empress. The application of entry into the city had not been approved yet when the Empress sensed the opportunity for breaking through. She did not leave the city. This secondary city was no smaller than Dark Moon City, so it was fine for her to find any mountain forest that was unoccupied. There was no need to worry that she would bring disaster to others. Furthermore, in the Celestial Realm's case, the heavenly tribulation that was endured by Genesis Tears would not involve much of a commotion actually, because the structure here was too sturdy, so the destructive power would naturally not be overwhelmingly strong either. The Empress soon returned from enduring her heavenly tribulation, and advanced first into Saint King Tier. A whole group of people were about to break through, and all requested to come out. Those prodigies who could achieve success even in the ancient realm naturally would advance by leaps and bounds now that they were in the celestial realm, a sacred place of cultivation. At the very least, these people would practically not encounter any problems in cultivation before they reached the severing mundane tier. Of course, wanting to form the pinnacle level of 10 million stars in the eternal river tier was still incredibly difficult. So far, only Ling Han, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor had accomplished this feat. The good news was that everyone had achieved enough improvement in their grasp of the regulations of the two realms because there were no longer any regulations of two realms in the celestial realm, as they were naturally one here. There was no need to comprehend both, just like they only had to comprehend either the regulations of the immortal realm or the netherworld in the ancient realm, so it was naturally simple. However, it was also precisely because it was so simple that even if the others had merged the regulations of the two realms, they were unable to compare to Ling Han, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor in terms of battle prowess, despite their equal cultivation levels. It was like even the heavens knew that it had been extremely hard for Ling Han and his companions to merge the regulations of two realms in the ancient realm, and so made it so that their battle prowess was stronger. Those who had merged the regulations of the two realms left the Black Tower. There were massive unoccupied wilderness and forests here, and were completely sufficient for them to live in seclusion. They could not stay forever in the Black Tower, after all. They would set up base here, and with this as their base, would develop a new Great Ling Empire. Oh, since a nation could not be established in the celestial realm, it would just have to be called the Great Ling Sect. Ling Han had zero interest in building his own power base, allowing the others to just do whatever they liked. By now, the majority had already left the Black Tower, and only the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden were left by Ling Han's side. The Rain Emperor left alone. He was going to travel all over the celestial realm. His Tao was not suited to quiet cultivation. He had to battle all the way through. Ling Han informed him about the two methods to break through to the severing mundane tier, and the Rain Emperor nodded. He was a cultivation fanatic, and did not mind severing his mortal bonds at all, but since he was a cultivation fanatic, he naturally had to aim for the strongest way. Since there was a stronger way for achieving the severing mundane tier, why should he use the normal way? Ultimately, it was not everyone that could deliver this strike onto the heaven and earth. For the sake of immortality, a great many people here would have to sever the mortal bond that they valued the most. Ling Han involuntarily sighed. Returning once more to the inn, he saw that everyone else was waiting for him and the Empress. As it turned out, entry into the city had been approved. Let's go. They arrived at the center of the secondary city. There was a transfer formation, which could directly transfer everyone standing on it to Black Moon City in the skies here. Long Gaofei first showed the token of entry into the city, then paid as much as 120 star stones, which meant that every person had to pay an entrance fee of 10 star stones. Only then would the guards of the transfer formation allow them to enter, but they did not immediately activate the formation. Ling Han and his group waited for a good while, and after 100 people had gathered here, only then did the transfer formation activate. As it turned out, to save on energy for the transfer formation, it would only be activated when there were enough people. Faced with this kind of rule, even a severing mundane ancestor like Long Gaofei did not have the slightest sliver of a temper. He was only a first Severance Grand Elder, and while there were not as many severing mundane ancestors in a 2-star city as carp crossing a river, There were definitely a few thousand, and there were many that were stronger than him. If he dared act arrogantly, then he would be suppressed at any time. What more when there were dividing soul tiers in Black Moon City? Wang, the transfer formation shone with white light. Everyone could feel a slight tug on their bodies, and they had already arrived at another location. There was similarly a transfer formation, but it was different from the previous one. They had already arrived at the true Black Moon City. What dense spiritual qi! Mao Shuyu and the others all exclaimed in surprise. They had never been to a two-star city before, and this was their first time feeling such dense spiritual qi, so they were naturally excited. Long Gaofei similarly was slightly excited, but his expression did not show it. He lowly said, "Let's go to the relay station first." The Black Moon sect had set up the relay station deliberately for these visitors from their subordinate cities to make it easier to administer, and it would also be easier to find anyone if they needed to pass on any messages. The relay station was in a very remote location, a whole 7 days' journey from the transfer formation, and at this time, there were already many people from a considerable number of cities that had arrived. When they saw Long Gaofei bringing his group, some of them greeted him, while some glared at him. The relations among these 200-plus forces under the rule of the Black Moon sect were very complicated. Some of them had feuds, some were branch families descended from certain clans, and some were allied through matrimony, while others yet were sworn enemies. The celestial realm also had ancient sites and mystery realms, so it was inevitable that fighting over treasure would happen. Thus, it was really too easy for enmity to develop. As it happened, the Black Moon sect did not interfere at all in matters of internal strife. For example, if the 3 great clans of Dark Moon City were capable of conquering Bayou City, they could completely make this city their own as long as the tribute that they should pay did not decrease. This was equivalent to indulging their subordinate forces. Otherwise, Dark Moon City would not need to spend a large volume of their resources on the city walls. This actually was the biggest expenditure of their yearly income. Precisely because of this kind of enmity and grudges, if anyone drew an enemy city during the competition, a bloody fight was inevitable, and casualties were completely normal. After they settled down, Long Gaofei told them to rest well, and not to go out and cause any kind of trouble no matter what. This was the main city of Black Moon City, and anyone here could possibly have the backing of a 3rd severance, 4th severance, or even dividing soul tier. Putting aside the fact that they were only Genesis tiers, even Long Gaofei could be killed without giving him any bit of face at all. Another 2 days later, the participating teams from the over 200 cities had all arrived. Long Gaofei left for a while, and brought back some information with him. This piece of information recorded the stakes of each representative team of the various cities emerging victorious. Correct. Every time this kind of competition occurred, it was a distinguished event for Black Moon City, and all the forces could place a bet on every match in the competition. They could also make a wager on the winning team in advance. The earlier the bet was placed, the higher the stakes would be. The logic was very simple. As the competition progressed, the number of participating teams would swiftly decrease, so the stakes naturally would be adjusted accordingly. And to the participating teams, this table showing the stakes was also a ranking of strength from a certain point of view. We are ranked at the 224th place. After Mao Shuyu swept an eye over it, she immediately jumped up. This was really looking down on them too much, actually giving them the stakes of 122. There were only a total of 237 one-star cities under the administration of the Black Moon sect, and they were actually ranked 14th from the back. Yet Ling Han shook his head mentally. Why weren't they ranked last? That way the stakes would be even higher, and he would be able to earn even more money. Chapter 1696. Requirements for ascending onto Celestial Clouds Island. The participating teams could not place bets on the victory or defeat of their own team, but they could bet on the other teams. Of course, it was completely fine for them to bet on their own team becoming the champion. This was something that could not be cheated. Bets could be made in the relay station itself, and both Ling Han and the Empress bet all their wealth on Dark Moon City, with stakes of 122. With the present stakes, as long as they won one match, these stakes would fall to at least stakes of 1:5. Thus, it was best to bet early. Mao Shuyu and the others were all confident in Ling Han, and they too took out their full wealth and bet on Dark Moon City. In the eyes of the staff of the gamble house, This was absolutely normal. Any participating team would basically bet that they would become the champion. This was a kind of self-confidence. Unfortunately, it was destined that only one team could charge out of the ranks and become champion. Not too long after, Long Gaofei also came over to place a bet. He was a severing mundane ancestor, so his bet was high. He actually placed a bet of 100,000. This probably was not his individual wealth either, but was rather betting on behalf of the three great clans. After they returned, the profits would definitely have to be divided equally among them. This time, your chances of winning are very high. However, you must not be careless either, Long Gaofei said solemnly. I have just gotten some detailed information about some teams, and there are a few teams that are extremely strong. According to the usual rules, the top 8 teams from the last competition would automatically enter into the final rounds, and the remaining teams would have to compete over 24 slots for the final rounds. Being able to rise above the others, these 8 strong teams naturally were incredibly powerful. The champion of the last competition was Double Extreme City. Their previous strength only allowed them to advance into the finals, but in the last competition, a top prodigy named Yuan Xingping had appeared. In the last competition, it was he who had single-handedly brought Double Extreme City into the finals, and seized the first place. And now, this Yuan Xingping had still not advanced into the Severing Mundane tier yet, but the Severing Mundane pool would be opening soon after. He had more than 90% chance of becoming a Severing Mundane tier there. Thus, it was possible that this competition would be the last time he ascended onto the stage and made a public appearance as a Genesis tier. Yuan Xingping was determined to win the first place this time. It was rumored that a big shot of the Black Moon sect had already extended an olive branch to him. Once he had advanced into the Severing Mundane tier, that VIP would take him as a disciple, so he needed to show as perfect a performance as possible. Aside from Double Extreme City, there was the veteran strong team, White Sun City. They had always been regulars among the top 4, and they had managed to charge into the final rounds in the last few competitions. They were the champions in the competition before the last. This team did not have a super genius like Yuan Xingping, but every single person's strength was quite balanced, and their cooperation was very well coordinated as well. Who knew, they might be able to pull Double Extreme City off their pedestal this time round. The top 8 teams could not be underestimated, but aside from the top 8, there was another team that had to be noted seriously, and that was Blue Flame City. That was because an incredible prodigy whose name was Dan Yujing had appeared in their team. She was known as the second Yuan Xingping, which showed how highly she was regarded. Like Yuan Xingping, her individual strength was incredibly strong. It was said that she had the ability to fight 100 all on her own. However, this kind of competition was ultimately the battle of 10 people. If one's teammates were too lame, it was still possible that they would lose and be left only with resentment. There were still 10 days before the official competition would begin, and teams like them would first have to draw lots to decide which set they would be in. In the beginning round, a large number of teams would not be drawn. They only had to see which 37 teams were so unlucky to be drawn for the first round. Ling Han and his group's luck was not too bad, and they were not drawn for the first round. To ensure that the competition was relatively fair, lots would be drawn again after every round of battles, so they still did not know whom they would be matched up against. Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others all came over. After the matter of Ding Xiaochen, a clear divergence had appeared in the team of 10. Ling Han, Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, Qin Henyu, and Luo Xinyang had clearly formed their own little group, while Ding Xiaochen was on better terms with the other 4 members. What is it? Ling Han was sipping tea with the Empress in the courtyard. This tea was naturally made from the reincarnation tree leaves. As the aroma of the tea wafted, it formed multiple patterns of great Tao. With the present condition of the reincarnation tree, even a severing mundane ancestor would feel a rush of excitement for this kind of tea leaves. Ling Han extended a hand, and regulations spread out, blocking the patterns of great Tao that exuded from the reincarnation tea. It was best not to reveal one's valuables inadvertently. He had no wish to become the target of even more severing mundane tears. Mao Shuyu and the others did not suspect anything, and exclaimed, "Come quickly. There is a test outside, and as long as you reach the set standard, you will be able to go to Celestial Clouds Island tomorrow night." Celestial Clouds Island. Celestial Clouds Island is a large meteorite-orbiting Black Moon city. That is the living quarters of the present Holy Son of the Black Moon sect. Mao Shuyu's eyes were filled with stars. This Holy Son is a prodigy that would be rare to come by even in countless eras. It is said that he has formed 10 million stars in the eternal river tier, and is a living legend. 10 million stars. Ling Han's heart throbbed. That was truly a proud achievement, capable of matching him, the Empress, and the Rain Emperor. They all said that only the holy sons and holy daughters of large sects could achieve this kind of prodigious achievement. It was reasonable to say that the Black Moon sect was not qualified to be called a large sect yet. At least, an immortal palace tier force could only barely be qualified. For a 2-star force to be able to produce such a prodigy was indeed extraordinary. This holy son is called Chong Sunliang. It is said that he is only over 100,000 years old, yet has already attained enough comprehension of cultivation level. Once the Severing Mundane pool opens, he will be able to become a Severing Mundane tier, Mao Shuyu continued, clearly having done her research, and was a firm supporter of this holy son. It was unknown whether Zhang Cheng's face would turn green with envy if he had witnessed this scene. Luo Xinyang nodded, and said, "The Severing Mundane pool is the best location for severing mundane in the territory under the rule of the Black Moon sect. If one could successfully sever the mundane there, he would be much stronger than his peers even after advancing into the Severing Mundane tier. Too bad, we are still a very long time away from breaking through into the Severing Mundane tier, and if we miss the Severing Mundane pool opening this time, we will have to wait another 10 million years." Qin Hanyu shook her head. Even though they were already peak stage Saint Kings, it was very common to be stuck for a few 100 million or 1 or 2 billion years between the Saint King tier and Severing Mundane tier. Ling Han's interest was piqued by this holy son, and he asked, "What test do we have to undergo?" "Come, it's very simple." These people pulled Ling Han along with them, but no one dared make any kind of intimate contact with the Empress, because the Empress's intimidating aura was too strong, so they did not even dare to come too close to her. The Empress followed behind them, and the 6 of them arrived outside. They could see that a pillar had appeared outside the doors of the relay station abruptly, and there were multiple holes on it. When they arrived, there just happened to be a person that was attacking this holed pillar. With a wang, rows of holes lit up one after another. A total of 4 rows lit up, and there were 10 holes in each row, but only 3 holes lit up on the 5th row. 43 holes, just barely considered an elite, but still not qualified to ascend onto Celestial Clouds Island. At the side of the pillar, there was a young man seated in a cross-legged position, making his assessment. He had a head of red locks, which was very eye-catching. The person who had struck just now was defiant and retorted, "I have been watching here for quite some time, and all those before me have only managed to light up 30+ holes. I have lit up more than 40, and that is still not enough." "Not enough." The red-haired young man shook his head. "You're inferior to even me, and you still dream of gaining the favor of Lord Holy Sun?" He didn't stand up. With a casual movement, he delivered a punch through the air towards the stone pillar. Wang, rows of holes immediately lit up, actually reaching as many as more than 50. The gap was clear. Firstly, he had struck the pillar from a distance, and secondly, he was merely seated and delivered a casual strike. If he tried his best, he would probably be capable of achieving as many as 60 holes, or even 70 holes. Chapter 1697. A record that drives others to despair. Everyone inhaled sharply. Even a follower of Chong Sun Liang was already so awesome, so just how strong was that holy son himself? The red-haired young man swept an eye over the gathered masses, a condescending smile at the corner of his lips, and announced, "With a single strike from Lord Holy Sun, he can simultaneously light up 99 of the 100 holes on the pillar." Hiss, 99. Everyone gaped, appearing to be incredibly stunned. Most of them had tried, and even if there was an extremely wide gap of power between them, the difference in the number of holes was only 1 to 2, and the total would be more than 30. But with this difference of more than 60 holes, just how wide was the gulf in battle prowess between them and the Holy Sun? This was practically unthinkable. And this was the strength of the Holy Son of the Black Moon sect. Others did not even have the right to look up at him. Then, how many holes would have to be lit up to gain the right to ascend onto Celestial Clouds Island? a person in the crowd suddenly asked. That was a young man that was very average-looking. He was half a head shorter than most people, so only his voice was heard. However, after he said these words, the people in front of him all got out of the way, making it so that he would stay out. The red-haired young man glanced over, and his pupils involuntarily shrank slightly as a coldness rose up from the bottom of his heart. His whole person shot up from the ground, and he had entered a state of wariness. It was as if what he was looking at was not a person, but rather a ferocious beast from the primitive times. Which one of the people that had appeared here was not a top prodigy? And when they saw this, they were all surprised. The red-haired young man was actually scared to this extent. Could it be that this short young man was very strong? They could not tell, because they themselves were not strong enough. Ling Han nodded mentally. This short young man's strength was indeed superior to the red-haired young man's. The red-haired young man wiped the cold sweat on his forehead before he answered. 70 holes, and you may ascend onto Celestial Clouds Island. Then, he cast a look at the short young man again. His eyes filled with wariness. The short young man nodded with a smile and said, Then I'll give it a try. He walked out, and arrived in front of the hold pillar. Then he paused, turned his head and asked, How many attempts can be made? 3. The red-haired young man had broken out in a cold sweat again, feeling like he was being stared at by a terrifying giant beast when the other party looked at him. This was too frightening. The short young man smiled, and balled his right hand into a fist. Then, he very casually threw out his fist at the hold pillar. Multiple rows of holes lit up. 7 rows had lit up completely, and 1 hole on the 8th row had also lit up. 71 holes. Everyone was astonished. So there really was someone that had battle prowess that could light up more than 70 holes? They had not managed to do so, because they were far from being strong enough. How should I address you, sir? Faced by powerful strength, the red-haired young man also became respectful, losing the arrogant demeanor that he had previously shown. Swift Lightning City, Bianjia, the short young man replied casually. His eyes were fixed on the hold pillar, and his expression had also become solemn. Though he had attained the right to ascend onto the island, there was no joy in his expression. Instead, he appeared incredibly cautious. He had only lit up 71 holes, but Chong Sun Liang could reach as many as 99 holes, so just how big was the gap between the two of them? I'll give it another try, Bianjia said, and began building up power. Roar! The roar of a beast rang out from within his body, sounding a bit like the roar of a dragon, but also similar to the roar of a tiger. After the roar was heard, those standing around him actually collapsed directly. What astonishing strength! He had not even struck yet, and only a single roar was enough to subdue his enemies without fighting. Ripples of a strong aura surged out from his body, and pushed those gathered around him into a continuous retreat like a tsunami. What peak stage Saint Kings, they were not strong enough to resist at all. In this manner, the true elites immediately appeared clearly like Ling Han, the Empress, and over a dozen other people were all standing proudly where they were, none taking a step back. But elites on the same level were still divided into different classes. Some people were only barely standing, while Ling Han and the Empress were completely indifferent. When they unleashed their aura, that was what true terror was. Bianjia unleashing his aura was not for the purpose of showing off, or to injure any enemies, but rather to build up enough power for a powerful move, which caused his loss of control over the aura in his body. Prodigies would all be defiant. This hold pillar was the medium of competition between himself and Chong Sun Liang. The latter managed to light up 99 holes, and if he could not manage to light up even 99 holes, then no matter how abundant his battle experience was, he would only lose with resentment in the face of being overwhelmed by absolute power. He finally moved, and it was still a punch. However, there was a mass of lightning wrapped around his fist this time round, and one could clearly see multiple patterns of great Tao throbbing there, forming multiple dragons of lightning. Pang! As his punch landed, the glow of lightning spread out, shaking the world. When the glow of lightning disappeared, rows of holes also began to light up on the stone pillars. It was still 8 rows, and the first 7 rows had lit up completely, while 9 holes had lit up on the 8th. What? Such a frightening attack only increased his record from 71 holes to 79 holes. He had not even broken through to 80 holes. 99 holes, this was practically a record that would drive others to despair. Hiss, just how strong was the holy sun, Chong Sun Liang? Bianzhe had no choice but to admit defeat. He looked dumbly at the holed pillar, his face bearing a desolate expression. At first, he had thought that he was already standing at the highest peak of Saint King tier, and only he had the right to look down on others, but only now did he find out that there were others that were stronger than him. This gap was too large, so large that he did not even have the confidence that he was able to surpass this record. So even if their cultivation level was the same, the gap between them could still be this wide. However, Bianzhe himself was also someone that others would have to look up to. 79 holes, this was the best record as of now, and he was the only person who had gained the qualification to enter Celestial Clouds Island. If just anyone could become a guest on Celestial Clouds Island, then true prodigies would definitely ignore this with disdain, and would be too embarrassed to join such a group. But even an elite like Bianzhe only managed to get a result of 79 holes, which caused the top prodigies to feel their fighting spirit rise. Just how many holes can I light up? Many thought. Ho ho, I will give it a try as well. A young man in white walked out, bearing an elegant demeanor. His outward appearance was much better than Bianzhe's. However, his strength was inferior to Bianzhe's. Even with using a powerful move, he had only lit up 74 holes. Though there was only a difference of 5 holes, the gap was still very big between the two of them. However, he still gained the serious regard of the others. They were sure that he would definitely demonstrate extraordinary skill in the competition 10 days later. Every time such a competition was held, it was the time for such prodigies to shine as brilliantly and dazzling as fireworks. Prodigies continuously appeared. Though there were a few others who had achieved lighting up more than 70 holes, there was still no one that had broken through the impressive mark of 80 holes. Mao Shuyu, Wei Bo, and the others also approached to make an attempt, but even if they had summoned their own god tools and tried their best, the strongest Mao Shuyu only managed to light up 62 holes. There appeared only to be a gap of 8 holes, but it was unknown how much she would have to improve her strength to be able to catch up. Perhaps she could only light up more than 70 holes after a few tens of millions of years of accumulation, and increase her number of stars to 20 billion or 30 billion. They were just egging Ling Han on to make an attempt as well when a commotion suddenly broke out in the crowds. Look, Yuan Xingping is here. Among such exclamations, the crowd subsided like floodwaters, allowing a single person to walk through. Yuan Xingping, the publicly acknowledged top elite of this competition. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.